afternoon, everyone. I think it's still afternoon. And welcome to the City of Charlotte's monthly council strategy session. This meeting is being held in compliance with the electronic meeting laws, and we have several folks that have joined us in the room and several that are joining us virtually. And I'm going to begin with introductions of those inside of the building, and we'll start with our Deputy City Clerk.
Billy Tons, Deputy City Clerk.
Greg Phipps, at large.
Julia Zook, Mayor Pro Tem and serving at large.
I am Vi Lyles, and I serve as mayor.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Good evening. Ed Driggs, District 7.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
All right, and now we will ask the members that are joining us virtually for introductions.
Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
Mark Picard, District 6.
Braxton Winston at large.
All right. I believe Mr. Newton had a road trip to Raleigh today as he continued judge, and I believe he will try to join us, depending, I guess, on the traffic on I-85. And so with that, let me go ahead and begin our meeting. We've got several really important items today, but I think the manager is going to lead us off. Mr. Jones.
So, thank you, Mayor, members of council. As the mayor mentioned earlier, this is our December strategy meeting, and typically at the strategy meeting, it's an opportunity for staff to bring you updates on information that has been asked from previous business meetings or previous council sessions, as well as having the typical committee report outs. So item 3 today are the council committee report outs, which I believe are in front of you. But before we do the report outs, in my last 30-day memo, I suggest that we come back to you and give you some updates on a couple of areas. One is the COVID-19 federal stimulus update, and the second is the state transportation improvement projects update. Going in reverse order, I talked about council report outs, but the state transportation improvement projects update is started with the conversation, I believe, at the last business meeting, or at least the last action briefing, when we discussed a couple of roads related to the Centene project. So I believe that we will have both Liz Babson and Tracy Dotson come tonight to try to pull this all together, how these impact each other. And then lastly, which will be first, is we have Sean Heath would come in tonight and give you an update on the federal stimulus package. One concept that we're trying to bring before you tonight is to come back with some of the items that had previously been discussed. And I think Sean has done a very good job of putting these in different buckets, if you will, ranging from some items that need a whole lot more work on them to some items that are ready for a future council action. So, Mayor and Council, if there aren't any questions, I'd like to turn it over to Sean. And we do have one item for closed session.
All right. Mr. Heath, how are you?
Good afternoon. Sean Heath from the City Manager's Office. Thanks for the introduction. Manager Jones. Next slide, please. Thank you. Starting here, just wanted to reinforce that staff's really been working hard over the last couple weeks to really set this presentation up to demonstrate that we're being responsive to your questions and your expectations. So there are a few things that we wanted to accomplish tonight, and I apologize. Some of this will be a little bit of a repeat from what you've heard before, but we really want to use this as an opportunity to level set. where are we at with all of the stimulus funding that's come to the city of Charlotte. So what you'll hear is a bit of an informational update related to the various stimulus funds received by the city of Charlotte. We also want to reinforce, to Manager Jones' point here before I walked into the room, our desire to find a way, an efficient way, to bring opportunities to you for conversation when they're ripe for conversation. And tonight we'll have a few of those which are referenced here on the bottom of this slide. So I won't go into the specifics of those items at the bottom because we're going to have plenty of opportunity to dive into those together. Next slide, please. This is a summary snapshot that should look familiar to everyone. Everything here relates to the American Rescue Plan, and these are items that we've discussed at various levels of detail before. First, under ARPA, there are various branches of funding. One relates to homeless assistance. In particular, it's the HUD Home Program. This is a rounded number. The actual allocation was $11.6 million. Second, emergency rental assistance. Emergency rental assistance has come to states and local governments in various ways over the last 18 months. The most recent allocation we received was under ARPA, and it's referred to as Emergency Rental Assistance number 2, and that was approximately $29 million. As noted on the footnote here, about half of that $29 million allocation has been put to work in the community supporting residents that are eligible for rental assistance. And then finally here on the largest stack, the Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, which, as you're aware, comes to the City of Charlotte in 2 installments. The first installment of $71 million was received in May of this year, and the second installment will be received in May of 2022. Next slide, please. So moving from left to right on each item that I referenced on the previous slide, for homeless assistance related opportunities, there are 2 in particular. One relates to the Charlotte Rescue Mission, which I shared with you at a high level at the Fall Strategy Retreat. And what we've staged here is a $4 million opportunity to participate in the Charlotte Rescue Mission's overall capital campaign associated with a new building for the Rebound Program for Men. And I will provide a lot more information on that particular opportunity on the next slide, but just wanted you to see how the different puzzle pieces fit together here related to homeless assistance. The second item, which we've discussed before as well, is the notion of earmarking up to $10 million for use related to the 2025 Charlotte-Mecklenburg homelessness strategy. So going back to September, you'll recall that on September 13th, Gene Woods from Atrium and Housing Director Pamela Weidman provided an update on that work. That work was launched earlier this year. The work is ongoing. We expect that the strategic framework for that effort will be released in January, followed by an implementation plan in the second quarter of 2022. With that particular earmark, we believe we're at the point now where the best next step is to release an RFP, because under the ARPA HUD Home Program, there are 4 very distinct allowable uses that are explicitly defined in the guidance, and they're summarized here on this slide. So we think now's the time to let the market respond, see what kind of responses we get, and bring back in a set of recommendations to council for the use of that $10 million. We're certain that whatever emerges through the RFP will be very consistent with the type of strategies that are contemplated through the 2025 work that's underway today. In case you're doing quick math, if we can go back to the last slide just for a moment, just to make sure I'm clear on how these pieces do fit together. So the homeless assistance under ARPA is in fact $11.6 million. So the idea here would be $2 million of that related to the Charlotte Rescue Mission, 9.6 of that related to the 2025 Charlotte-Mecklenburg homelessness strategy. And in the footnote at the bottom of the slide, I mentioned that with the Charlotte Rescue Mission, in order to go from $2 million to $4 million, we have $2 million remaining. And I believe this is the only unobligated amount associated with all of our CARES Act funding, $2 million from our CARES CDBG balance, which would be a wonderful fit for the Charlotte Rescue Mission opportunity. So that's how the numbers fit together there.
Sean, I know you've said it twice, but can we go back one to make sure? You're only talking about that red box right now, right?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, so not the 100 and $42 million of this local final allocation, but these are different set of funds that we're trying to get out now. With the addition of the other $2 million comes from what pot again?
From the CARES CDBG allocation that we received.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for raising that point, because unlike the local fiscal recovery fund, the $142 million, where there's a tremendous amount of discretion in terms of the types of things that we can do with it, everything related to the HUD Home program, and frankly with CARES CDBG, there are limitations in the types of things that you can use it for. Thank you. Next slide, please. So just to breathe a little bit of life into the Charlotte Rescue Mission opportunity, which I'd mentioned to you back in October. So the mission of the Charlotte Rescue Mission is to serve people impacted by addiction, to equip them to thrive in the community. So quite some time ago, a campaign was launched in order to raise somewhere north of $25 million to enable the Charlotte Rescue Mission to really modernize its facilities. And for any of you that have been over to the Cedar Street location behind the Panther Stadium near the practice bubble, you would know that, and what you're looking at here is an artist's rendering of what the new building could look like, which would be either 4 to 5 stories. The existing building doesn't look quite that new. It's been around for about 100 years. The need for this project is very real. You know, to say the existing building is crowded is a bit of an understatement. They have barrack-style dormitory rooms, and they're anywhere from 15 to 40 men in these rooms at a time. So at the Charlotte Rescue Mission with the Rebound program, it's a 120-day recovery program. And with this investment from the city that's been staged, along with other funders who have already stepped forward, it will allow the Charlotte Rescue Mission to serve roughly 100 more men per year, which would be about a 25% increase. In terms of the status of their overall fundraising campaign, so far they have about $15 million of firm commitments from the private sector. That does not include anything that the city is contemplating here. It does not include anything that the county is contemplating as well. So they're well on their way towards building the funding stream that's necessary in order to bring this to life. In terms of outcomes, one of the things that I mentioned in October, one of the reasons staff is enthusiastic about this is the Charlotte Rescue Mission has demonstrated the ability to really do good things. And they have higher than a national average in terms of their ability to put people through the completion of the program. And then here we've made reference to a few metrics that they track. Upon completion, it's important that they focus on sobriety first and foremost, of course, but then also on housing and on employment. And you could obviously make the case that this investment, in fact, is also something that is very consistent with the type of work that's happening in the 2025 strategy, since clearly substance use is but one among many contributing factors to homelessness. And they shared with me recently that approximately 90% of the men entering the 120-day program are entering that program coming from a situation of homelessness. So that's the big level, that's the high level picture on that particular opportunity. Next slide, please.
Are there questions? Should we take questions specific to the rescue mission? Is that so? Mr. Phipps.
Yeah, the funds you're speaking of for the rescue mission, are those funds exclusively going to be used for the construction of the building? What about funds to deliver much needed services to the individuals? Is that a separate bucket?
Thank you. That's a great question. So the roughly 25 million or north of 25 million, predominantly all of that would really be devoted towards the construction of the facility itself. But with the funding that I mentioned for us, 2 million from CARES CDBG is very well suited to support construction costs. Whereas the 2 million from the ARPA HUD Home program is more suited to supporting really the programming that they would stand up around this new facility during the first year or two. So what we would be doing would in fact be a combination of bricks and sticks and also the supports on site. But the majority of the 25 million that they're raising will be for the actual capital costs themselves.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. This is more of a statement than a question, but I'm really happy to hear that we're focusing on this need. Substance abuse just doesn't get enough attention from us as a community, much less as government, but a 120-day program is fantastic. Most programs that are even covered by insurance are 30-day programs. Most people don't have success for a 30-day program, so I didn't know that about their program, and somebody, like a lot of families who've had this in our family, it's tough, and I'm really happy to see that we would be willing to support both the brick and mortar and the operating funds needed for this important cause. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, let's go ahead and keep going.
Okay. Next slide here, moving into the middle section of the original slide. I'm sorry, we went one too far. Back one, please. Okay. As I mentioned before, under the American Rescue Plan, the City of Charlotte received approximately $29 million related to emergency rental assistance. When I spoke to you at the fall strategy meeting, at that point, we'd really just started drawing down on that balance, and Dream Key Partners is our administrative partner in the community. So as of October 26th, I think we had about $25 million remaining from the $29 million allocation. Now you can see we have about $13 million in that fund, and this is as designed, right? I mean, this money is being put to work to support members of the community that are in need. As I've said a number of times, but I'll underscore here again, working with Dream Key, we've very intentionally set up a number of priority categories to help ensure that funding is channeled to those individuals in the community that are most at risk of eviction. So priority 1, for instance, requires an individual to have received an eviction notice and have a court date within 90 days. Priority 2 is 30% AMI or below and employed for 90 or more days, et cetera, et cetera. So we will continue working down through that balance to support members of the community in need. I did want to mention with points 2, 3, and 4 on this particular slide, it's important to keep in mind the context, the broader context around what's happening on this important issue in the community. First and foremost, there are other funders that are providing resources to this challenge. And it's my understanding that as of last week, I believe Dream Key had a little over $20 million associated with Mecklenburg County emergency rental assistance that is still being put into the community. Crisis Assistance Ministry is of course, doing work along these lines as well. On point number 3, if you ignore everything we've just talked about in terms of the American Rescue Plan, if you go back to October of 2020, that's when the City of Charlotte received our first emergency rental assistance allocation. It was under a separate and distinct stimulus plan. We have put all of that money to work in the community. And just to cut to the chase on this one, there were states and local governments that received their emergency rental assistance allocation at the end of 2020 and didn't use all of it. So what the U.S. Treasury has done is at a certain milestone date, they've clawed that back from those jurisdictions, and now they are reallocating it to states and cities like the City of Charlotte that did in fact put all of our money to work in the community. So essentially, we've put ourselves in a position where we could be eligible for some additional relief from the U.S. Treasury Department. We've put in the application, and I can't guarantee where it will land, but we'll see what happens. And to the extent we receive more money, we already have mechanisms in place to put it to work. And then finally, number 4, as I mentioned before, a new federally funded program focused specifically on water customers is the Low-Income Household Water Assistance Program, LIWAP. And federally funded, it will be administered by Mecklenburg County. Angela Charles, Charlotte Water Director, and her team are working closely with the Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services. Mecklenburg County has received their first installment of LIWAP funding, and we're going through an exercise in partnership with them to evaluate which of our customers are eligible to receive those funds. So just wanted you to be aware there's a lot of activity in this space, and I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention the great work that's happening in Willie Ratchford's organization and the Community Relations Committee. He has dispute settlement team personnel at the courthouse 5 days a week, providing mediation services, working with landlords and tenants to try to help them find resolution. And the last point here is just a reminder that while I've characterized this as rental relief, It both helps ensure these individuals avoid eviction, but it's also providing the resources directly to the landlords and the property managers. That's the way that this program is designed. So it has kind of a dual benefit there. Should I open up to any questions
Mr.
on?
Phipps has a question
Okay.
or a comment.
Yeah, under bullet point 1, the priority 1 eviction notice and have a court date within 90 days. I thought I read something yesterday that if a tenant missed their court date, they would automatically be disqualified from the program. Is that true?
Mr. Phipps, if they missed their court date,
Right.
that they would automatically be disqualified? I'm not sure if that's the case. I'd have to take that as an action item. While I'm going through here, if Housing Director Weidman happens to have an answer, I'd invite her to walk in and provide a real-time response.
Is there any kind of follow-up for tenants to remind them of an upcoming court date to be able to participate in this program?
Once again, I do not know the answer to that question, but I can find out.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Ms. Ajmera?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of questions. So under the rental relief,
Ms. Ajmera, can you speak into your mic a little bit more louder so that we can hear you?
sure. How is
Thank
it
you.
now? Is it better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, great. A couple of questions on the rental relief here. So, in order for rent relief assistance, so for folks to qualify, does it have to be COVID reasons? So let's say if someone lost their job during pandemic, does it have to be COVID related?
Yes, for this particular stimulus funding, there does have to be a direct connection to an individual being in some way harmed by COVID. I would follow up to say that's one benefit of having agency partners in the community, because crisis assistance is available to provide assistance that's not directly linked to individuals that can demonstrate COVID impact.
Got it. Okay. And then I know you had mentioned that housing providers could directly apply. I know in 2020, when we rolled out the rental relief program, we had gotten several requests regarding how many housing providers were experiencing delays in getting the assistance. So under this new model, are we addressing those concerns? And what is the process like? What is the turnaround time frame?
Yes, so I do know that, so landlords can in fact initiate this process so long as they have the consent of the tenants themselves. And I don't have an exact answer on the cycle time associated with how long does it take from day one when an application is submitted to having an answer and ultimately having the relief provided. Once again, I'll take a homework assignment on that. It's a great question.
Okay. I just want to emphasize the turnaround time frame. We have to be nimble. I know in 2020 we have received several emails from housing providers raising concerns around the turnaround time frame, where housing providers were having to wait months for relief dollars. So I just want to make sure that those concerns are being addressed in this process. It's great that now housing providers can initiate an application. I think that's great with the consent of the tenant, but we got to focus on reducing the time frame. We have to be nimble to ensure that relief is getting out there in a timely fashion. Thank you.
All right. We'll get that additional information. All right,
Okay.
Any other questions? I know, but I was asking Ms. Ajmera. Anything else, Ms. Ajmera?
I'm good. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, Mr. Winston?
Thank you. I think it would be a welcome relief to both tenants and landlords. to see that there may be an additional bucket of money that could come through for rental relief. You may have said it, but I just may not have caught it. How do we secure that $30 million of additional rental relief that is potentially out there right now?
Yes, Mr. Winston, I believe at this point we've done all that we can, which is we've submitted a formal application. So we were essentially invited to participate in the process based on the fact that we had dispersed our emergency rental assistance 1.0, so to speak. So now the application is in and we're waiting an answer.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted some clarification on item number 2. It mentions that there's additional relief available for community agencies such as Dream Key Partners and Crisis Assistance. I thought at one point that we were using Dream Key solely and as the vendor for the funds. Are we supporting Crisis Assistance in this process now?
Thank you for the clarification. Dream Key is the partner that we've relied on for all of our emergency rental assistance 1.0 and 2.0. With item number 2 on the slide, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't leave council members or members of the community under the impression that there's only $13 million available in the community for rental and utility relief. That's one piece of a larger puzzle. Dream Key is our partner, but they're also in partnership with Mecklenburg County. Crisis Assistance has its own set of funders that they're relying on in order to support their work.
Okay. And then are we supporting any projects that are still paying for individuals who are living in the hotels? In the hotels, we know that there's a large number of folks that live in the hotels right now, hotels and motels. So is there a focus on providing support for those individuals? And then my last question is, do we know the status of the individuals who were placed in hotels or motels due to that were residents of Tent City? Is there a current update on the status of those individuals?
I'll ask Housing Director Weidman to provide some perspective on those questions.
All right. You know you can't get away with the idea of coming to that podium, Ms. Weidman, without us expressing our appreciation for the work that you've done and understandably committed to this community for a very long time, and you deserve the opportunity to move forward however you choose. But I want you to know how grateful we are for what you've done to make this city so much better. So you can answer the tough questions all the time. You always have compassion, and you always honor and respect this body, even when we don't get it quite right. And I can't tell you how much that is appreciated. And thank you for the service that you're giving us. Thank you so much.
So, Madam Mayor, you have a wonderful way of making this harder than I have some more requests of you next Monday. So this is not the last time, but thank you so much. This council is amazing. Your support for affordable housing is unwavering. It's recognized across the nation, and it's been rewarding. Mayor, I'll say to you personally, to work with somebody and to have a mayor who looks like me, and for all the little girls, particularly African-American women around the country. So I really, really do appreciate that. But to answer your question, because you've also taught me to stick to the point, and council, that goes for you too, and Manager Jones, I'll talk more if you allow me about my appreciation for you as well. But to answer the question, Mr. Phipps, your question, if someone misses a court date, date, the funds are still reserved for them. And so we leave it up to them to work it out if they can get another court date, but the funds are still reserved. As far as the status of Hope residents and who were former Tent City residents, Ms. Johnson, you may recall that we entered into a partnership with United Way. They are still working through that, and we can get a status update on the exact numbers. When we entered that, we said that because many of those residents had multiple and high barriers to housing, that it would take a long time to work through that and to get them stably housed. But United Way continues to work through that partnership to do that work. And again, we'll get you an and then the last question I think you all had was about the turnaround time for landlords. You may recall that earlier in this, we set up a program, Dream Key did, where we take applications until the 15th of the month, and we use the last 15 days of the month to process that. That way, we want to make sure that we are not backlogging the system and that we are getting those applications processed. So we're happy to do any additional follow-ups, but I could provide those 3 answers for you tonight. Thank you so much.
All right. Ms. Johnson?
Pam.
Ms. Weidman?
Ms. Weidman.
Yes, ma'am.
My question was regarding the residents who are in the motels. Is there assistance for them? Is there? I wanted the status of that.
Let me get you a more detailed answer to that, Ms. Johnson. I want to make sure that I'm telling you factual information.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. I don't have any further questions on or comments from the council on this page.
Okay.
So let's
All right.
keep on going.
Next slide, moving along. On the American Rescue Plan Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, the first $71 million installment, you may recall that I presented first in July on an overall investment framework, and then I came back in September and talked a little bit about both rental relief as well as some of the things that this council has led and staff has led over the last 12 to 14 months to gather community input associated with the use of stimulus funds. And then in October, of course, at the Fall Strategy Retreat, we discussed this as well. And in all 3 of those instances, we've shared with you that what we've contemplated as it relates to the overall allocation of the $71 million is that we would devote $11 million to city operations, and that we would devote $60 million to community support, which may beg a logical question of, well, how did you decide that? And in part, we wanted it to base it on what we knew were some emerging needs in the city operations area, but also we benchmarked it, so to speak, against what we did with the CARES Act. And you may recall in the CARES Act, we had $154 million at our disposal, and of the 154, 63 million or 40% was devoted to city operations. And a number of important things were done with that, including significant investments in the building we're standing and sitting in here today in order to make it more pandemic resilient. So we knew that we didn't need anything close to 40% associated with city operations in this first installment of American Rescue Plan funds. So 11 million is 15%, and we felt like that would be a reasonable starting point for the first installment. As Assistant City Manager Cagle shared with you in late August, with the various COVID-related programs that were discussed with Council, the 8 weeks of additional premium pay, which was initiated in late August, the vaccine incentive, which has been discussed before, and then emergency medical leave for employees for COVID-related purposes. All of those have been contemplated as a use of, as an allowable use of American Rescue Plan funding. I've also mentioned before that roughly $5 million has been earmarked for eligible INT expenditures, the largest of which would relate to network upgrades that are essential to sustaining this telework environment that we've all become so accustomed to. And then we still would have roughly $1 million available for other emergent needs that we couldn't fathom today, but that might materialize in the months ahead. So that was what we've contemplated for quite some time in terms of the 11 million versus 60 million. The 60 million is where we've left off before, and you're familiar with the references to housing at 17, workforce development, and employment at 16, and community vitality at 27. Next slide, please. This gets back to one of the opening remarks that Manager Jones made, which is for each of the 13 distinct investment opportunities that were shared with City Council in October, we've color-coded them as yellow, blue, green, or gold. Yellow is ideation phase, which is really simply meant to refer to opportunities where there's more work to do. We're either gathering information or we're brainstorming. So for the $17 million associated with anti-displacement strategies, as we've said for quite some time, we will look to a number of things to help inform those investment opportunities, one of which will be the pilot program in the 3 neighborhoods that we mentioned before, Washington Heights, Winterfield, and Hidden Valley. We have a team meeting tomorrow to really get our arms around some of the feedback that we're receiving from the community that could inform those strategies. With a number of the yellow ones in the workforce development and employment, I had a chance to listen in to the committee meeting earlier today, and there was a lot of energy around some work that's being done to really understand the state of the state for small business here locally and entrepreneurism, and some things that could potentially really shape and inform how those particular buckets are shaped or reshaped. So that's ideation phase. Design phase would be, for example, digital inclusion. We continue to work to develop out a plan that we would then, of course, bring back to council for a deeper conversation. Ready for council discussion would be just a few that are in green here today. And those would be ones where we think the plan has come far enough along where we're ready to present something specific to council to accept your feedback. And then council endorsed would be once we definitively have the green light to move forward and contract and disperse money. And at this point, the only one we've categorized as such is the $2 million associated with arts and culture that was, of course, part of your FY22 budget discussion. So for the balance of the slides, we really wanted to focus on these 3 items here that are shown in green, because those are the ones that are ripe and ready for discussion. And Economic Director Dodson can handle the first couple, and then I'll come back and talk about the YMCA. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Sean. Good evening, everyone. The initiatives that you see here under workforce development and employment are really about us continuing what we have been working on so far. So nothing new, just continuing the work that started last year or earlier this year. You've heard a lot about Hire Charlotte. Hire Charlotte's been really exciting. We really kicked this off over the summer, and we have brought a lot of entities in the ecosystem from the county, the Alliance, the Urban League, Goodwill, CELC, education providers like JCSU, to CMS, to Central Piedmont, together to talk about what are the jobs that we're training for, what are the jobs that we're recruiting in the ecosystem, and what are the gaps? Are we really aligned in the work that we're doing in connecting people and jobs and really identifying where the gaps are? So the money for Hire Charlotte would be to continue that work and continue to put a framework for the gaps that we see and initiatives to address those gaps. The second item, the corridors of opportunity. Obviously, a lot of momentum that was created in corridors. This initiative is almost a straddle between Hire and corridors, because we last year had hired EY to do a lot of work for us on the corridor about what is the labor in the corridors and what are the job opportunities in the corridors. In some corridors, we even went deeper to say what are the opportunities from a bricks and mortar real estate to put jobs in the corridors. And so really starting to build out the strategies very specific to people and jobs in the corridors, not just today, but also planning for tomorrow. And we want to continue that work. We did a deep dive on Beatties Ford, West Boulevard, and Wilkinson. We want to continue the work and really looking at some of these other corridors and developing strong strategies in our corridors of opportunity work that's specific to connecting people and jobs in those corridors. And then the last one is the Open for Business digital platform. We started this last year as a part of CARES. One thing that we heard when COVID hit was that people didn't know where to go. There was a lot of different entities that were trying to provide services to small businesses. And so we launched this Open for Business platform, and it's really intended to be something that can convene and connect people with businesses and residents to create more of a unified resource for Charlotte. Some of this work also includes bringing in some other platforms that we already had with other providers. The Charlotte Business Resource Center we've had for years, we're bringing that now into Open for Business and continuing to build out the Open for Business platform. And so with that, I will stop to see if there's any questions.
Okay. Any questions on this topic?
Ms. Ajmira.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of questions here. Ms. Dodson, $300,000 to build a strategic employment framework. So is that a plan, and that's going to cost us $300,000?
Yes, that is a plan that we have started and we're underway with, and that's probably about 8 months of work between research, developing the strategic plan, survey work, and focus groups, as well as convening all of the partners, plus more, that I mentioned earlier. The phase 2 is more about the implementation, which comes out of this framework that we're establishing now.
So as a, to build out this framework, are we hiring a consultant?
Yes, we've already hired the consultant. We've already started this work, and as I said earlier, we're about 6 months in on this work. And so we would like to continue the work.
Got it. So, so this is coming from ARPA dollars, is that correct?
From ARPA dollars, yes, that is our proposal. That's what we are asking for.
Okay, so this was already underway. So wasn't this something council was already working on for the past, how long have you been working on this framework?
We have been talking about starting this for quite a while. I think there was a little bit of money in the budget to get it started, then with the hope that we could come back and continue the work with ARPA funds. So the goal always was to put a little bit in the budget and then to put a little bit out of the ARPA funds to be able to continue the work. But we have been, to your point, Councilman Ajmira, we've been talking about this probably since last January, and we kicked off the work this summer in July.
Got it. I just think, I mean, $300,000 just to build out a framework, and we are not even in the implementation phase. That's $450,000. I mean, I just think that's quite a bit of money just to put a framework in place. I know we have talked about apprenticeship programs, and I know that has come up several times when we were having discussions around Atrium and the Innovation District. And I know that you had mentioned about how we can incorporate the apprenticeship programs into our overall strategy and our overall planning. How does that fit into this?
That could be a recommendation that comes out of the higher work that we're trying to do. Part of the purpose of higher is to really look at and understand the entire ecosystem, so we're not just pulling different initiatives and reacting to specific situations, that we're really thoughtful about the programs that either we're doing ourselves, that we're investing in, or that others in the ecosystem are doing. And so that's absolutely a recommendation that could come out of higher from the work that we do and are underway with.
Got it. So there could be a recommendation. I mean, we already know that we need to work and collaborate with those programs. I don't think we need a recommendation for it. We already know we need to work in collaboration with them. So that's the point I have. Thank you.
I just want to add and follow up. I think the breadth of this work for Higher Charlotte is absolutely essential. I would hope that it is a long-term plan that targets the ability for people that live in our city to get training, and after training, a job. It can be an apprenticeship program. It can be a hiring, just an investment in our younger people. It could engage our county and school systems in a way that I would hope that for this work that in the end result, we know who's unemployed or underemployed, who is actually ready and available to get additional training or modify what their career paths are, and there's actually a job at the end of that cycle. Without that, the value of it is just a document that's kind of strategic. And strategy is great, but we've got people that desperately need work right now. We have employers that desperately need employees right now. So I would encourage us that we can do some short-term, like immediate issues, like we can help the hospitality industry any way that we can, because I understand that that's one of the areas where cost of wages are going up and fewer workers. But this plan, as an expectation from my perspective, is that it actually is a key plan that looks at our population, those that are here and living here now, and give them a path towards economic mobility. Okay, I see you nodding. I want to say that very clearly. People that live here that are unemployed have a path to upward mobility.
It absolutely is, Mayor. And if you think about some of the conversations, for example, we had around Atrium and the Innovation District, and that was a whole new industry sector, right? Are we making sure that we are setting up the right training opportunities for those jobs that are coming in the future? And it's no different than the jobs that we recruit to Charlotte. Are we strategic about the jobs that we're trying to bring here to actually be filled from people in Charlotte because they're being trained for that? And that's what we really want to make sure is connected. It is not intended to be a 100-page plan. It's intended to be a framework that says you have a lot of people in this ecosystem that are trying to do the right thing. How do we best get connected? Just last little tidbit I'll leave you with on this is some of the survey work that we have done has identified that employers are going out with their own strategies about how to find, because they just, we're missing in the connection of people to the job. And that's part of the big thing that we're trying to solve, but we have to solve it as a team. If we just try to do it by ourselves, I think we'll miss it. And so that's why we've convened this bigger group is how can we create something that connects more people to the jobs that they're trained for?
And how do we begin to plan for the improvements in training that we have the opportunity to make that happen? If you're 18 now, what should you be doing at 25? If you're in 7th grade, what should we be talking to you about right now? And I just really feel like the cities that are doing this kind of work and thinking about the profiles of who we are and what we have available will make a difference. If not, it's just kind of like, I'm not a BB gun shooter or whatever, the buckshot shooter where the bullets go everywhere. And what is that called, Greg? Shotgun shot. I don't want a shotgun shot. Okay? All right. Thank you. Any other? Mr. Winston?
Yes, thank you. We should definitely ask the questions about, what jobs are needed. But I think to the mayor and council member Ajmira's points, I think we need to inform this work. I think the committee has been doing great stuff in this. We should continue on the tracks that have been presented. But I think we also need to inform this work with things that we already know. We know that we need to focus on trades. We know that labor is a high cost that drives up housing prices and is a key kind of villain in this fight against affordable housing, because a lot of labor has to be brought in from out of market. We know that trades are a pathway for the middle class, for workers right here, right now, to start small businesses and start to generate generational wealth. But we also know that, again, we're a city that's, again, we hope to continue to be defined by growth. It's an immediate need. These are jobs that can be trained rather quickly and put to work right now. Our city bird is the crane, right? So I don't think we need to study very much to know that labor need is real right now. So while we have the opportunity, I would hope that we would, again, inform this work and focus on the many, many building trades that are needed to build the city. and that are coming down the line with the types of investments that we're trying to do with the Transformational Mobility Network and things like that. Thank you.
So, thank you, Mayor. And this is a very good conversation. One of the things that's so important of the work that ED is doing right now, it is not just about, I guess, city and city staff. It's pulling in members of the county, members of the community, because we are trying to have that scan for the ecosystem. And if you look at the, I guess, previous slide, part of this work will inform what happens around workforce and what happens around small business development. So it's, I think it's one of those things that we drew the short straw, but we are okay with that because we'll be very intentional in how to figure this thing out.
All right. Mr. Bakari?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't the biggest fan of this stuff when it was first brought forth. If we had a nickel for every study or plan that we created and put on a shelf, we would use that to actually solve the problem. However, I was convinced enough to kind of stand back and down on it in the sense that it isn't just like a white paper that tells us, we have people that need skills, that need jobs. It's not as basic as that. It's a very complex ecosystem across all of Charlotte and Mecklenburg. It has hundreds of different parties that do certain things, that don't do others, that have gaps. Then paired with the fact that not only do we want to find and support what exists, but then help establish what doesn't, but then there's a more, strategic plan of how are we recruiting to different corridors, to different parts of town? How do we take and duplicate aspects of South End as it's grown into certain kinds of tech niches and do that with other parts of town where, we're seeing where the health tech is coming, but then there's advanced manufacturing or this or that. So I kind of, while I don't love spending money on consulting and plans, I did see the ED team's value ultimately in saying, hey, we can go throw some money at stuff, or we can really build a deep foundation of data of the ecosystem. And that's why I've, grudgingly kind of said, all right, I'll go along with that to whatever extent is necessary.
All right, Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, I think what the dilemma I think we're facing now, even with these plans that we're trying to implement, is the fact that we have a labor shortage going on where there's hundreds, even thousands of jobs that are available, but no one seems to be wanting to, just apply for them or work at them. So what? I think I might have brought this up at the last, the meeting before last. But what are we to do when we're confronted with a situation like this, where the need for workers is plentiful, but yet we have these programs where it seems like, something is definitely out of kilter. So what do we do to mitigate or rectify the current dilemma that we find ourselves in?
Well, and Councilmember Fitz, this is part of what we're working on right now. As I mentioned earlier, through some of this work, we figured out that a lot of employers are just kind of one-off doing their own thing to try to find the talent to fill the jobs. And we're really asking throughout the ecosystem and employers what's working and what's not working, and trying to understand why. So if we can find a model that works, we can start to replicate it for others. The other thing is we found that there's a lot of different platforms of job postings. How do we get so that there's the right resources for people and then get those resources out? So a lot of that is what we're looking at right now. That's a real-time problem. We're also having the conversations about the longer-term strategy that the mayor mentioned as well. So we're kind of trying to do both in this work.
Well, you're just going to have everybody else move here. They don't want to live where they are. Okay. All right, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, I wanted to respond to Councilmember Phipps. So we know there's a labor shortage, but still I hear from formerly incarcerated folks that can't get a job because of their record. So, I think there's an opportunity to really assist in that area. There is a gap, but you also have thousands or millions of folks who are looking for jobs and can't get one. So the federal government has a federal bonding program where I guess the government or the entity kind of provides a bond or reassurance for those employers. Or if the city could get involved some kind of way in providing training or providing some type of bonding for the individuals. We know that there's WOTC, the work opportunity credits, when individuals hire, when employers hire individuals with a felony record. If we could take a look at some kind of program like that, Tracy, if there's some training that they can go through, I think we did something like that before with the city for at least for our employees. But if there's something on a grander scale that we can do to validate or to support individuals who are coming home, to provide additional reassurance for employers, because employers, I know that they might be programmed that they don't want to hire anyone with a felony record. I've seen a case where an individual couldn't even work from home, because they had a felony record. So there really is this mark, that follows them for a long time. This would be a way to help bridge the equity gap, and there's just this huge opportunity for us or someone to do something. So when you ask the question, what can we do about this labor shortage? If we're able to provide a bonding or reassurance or additional licensing or education, I think that would be a win-win situation for the employers and also the potential employees. I know I've asked before in the ED committee, Tracy, about the individuals who have a criminal background, the number that are in Charlotte. So there's just a huge opportunity for us to provide some additional assistance in bridging that gap.
I'm making notes of it. Thank you.
I think that Ms. Johnson has consistently addressed this issue, and it's a tough one. It's very, very difficult because even while the federal government is funding programs to do this, they don't allow it for their own employees. And they have a lot of employees in this country. And it's just an interesting thing that we have to figure out, and I'm not quite sure how we do it, except work with all of the folks that we can that can help us understand why it's not happening and figure out how it can happen and be better. So thank you, Ms. Johnson, for your steadfast advocacy. All right, so with that, are there any other comments on this one? All right, the next one.
Okay, next slide, please. We are rounding third base here, and this is the $2 million related to youth and teen impact, which I had mentioned in October as an opportunity related to the YMCA. I think in the room that day there was some energy behind this opportunity, but just in the interest of being sure that everyone has a full understanding of how the $2 million could in fact be deployed, we wanted to lay that out here for you today. So half of it would go really towards access for up to 1,300 teenagers. And the emphasis here would be on quote-unquote zip codes of need. And I've explicitly identified 6 YMCAs that would participate in this programming. You can see there's a fair amount of overlap with our corridors of opportunity. And these teenagers would be recruited and brought in, provided access for 12 months. Moving down in terms of programming and initiatives, a lot of the bread and butter of what the YMCA does day in and day out. Here, with a particular emphasis on those 6 YMCAs, the YMCA could juice up their programming associated with everything from STEM to literacy to arts to outdoor experiences. As I mentioned, just the sorts of things that the YMCA does a great job with. In the physical mental health initiatives, on mental health in particular, a couple of things that intrigued me there. One, this would help ensure that these teenagers have access to licensed mental health professionals as needed. And the YMCA actually has some workshop experiences that are available to teenagers associated with developing their mental health strength and also suicide prevention programming as well. So that was really compelling for the team. And then finally, a relatively modest amount, just over 1%, would be devoted to marketing. You really can't underscore how important it is, even for a brand like the YMCA, to have some resources available in order to ensure that if programming like this is stood up and if access is enabled, that there are in fact connection points to the community to ensure that there are hundreds and if not thousands of individuals that are taking advantage of this programming. So that at a high level is how the $2 million associated with youth and teen impact could be deployed. I can transition to the final slide, which is a great opportunity if anybody has questions about the YMCA or feedback or anything else that we've discussed here today. We wanted to just capture all of this in one place, just to be crystal clear what we've staged and what the next steps would look like. And instead of going through all of these in line item detail, because it's essentially what we covered tonight, I would just highlight that homelessness-related support was the $4 million for the Charlotte Rescue Mission, as well as up to $10 million associated with the HUD Home program on the 2025 homelessness strategy. The intended next steps for those would be for the Charlotte Rescue Mission to put a contract in place to allow that money to flow as part of their campaign. And for the $10 million on ARPA HUD Home, the next step would be to release an RFP to the market and let the market respond. Item number 2 on here refers back to the original allocation of the $71 million in 2 categories, one focused on city operations, one focused on community support. And then finally, the 3 specific funding opportunities that are ready for council discussion that Director Dodson and myself just reviewed with you over the last 15 to 20 minutes. And this would be or could be the model. We don't need to go back to the color-coded slide, but the idea, just to state the obvious, is to move the ones in the ideation phase into the design phase, move the ones in the design phase into the ready for council discussion phase, and then with your support, move the ones after council discussion into implementation mode. So I'll pause there. That's the conclusion of our prepared remarks.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean and Tracy, for the presentation. I know you don't want to go back to that slide.
Oh, we can.
You know, I just think it's worth pointing
Yeah.
out because we're talking about $60 million. $2 million was arts and culture, which we know was already going to go out the door. It's only $4 million at the moment that's ready to go. It's been ready to go for months. We got to get that out the door. I know we voted already, so it's not like we need another vote, but the manager said he'd come back and share with us what's ready to go, and you've done that. So I would hope that we could get that $4 million out as soon as possible. You know, the community needs this help, and we've been going back and forth with this for a long time, and we needed to. We got to make sure that it's done properly, but I would hope that we could do that, and as you say, get that ideation initiatives into the council discussion so that we can then keep that moving along as well.
All right. Mr. Newton?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to briefly touch on the funding proposal for the YMCA and really just give kudos to the Y and all that they do. My frame of reference is the Simmons Y in East Charlotte. They are a tremendous community partner, particularly for our youth. So wanted to mention just how important I think it is that that we have that included in these in this proposal, and how happy I am to see it as a recommendation.
Yeah, with respect to the YMCA funding, I noticed that you say that it was geared to teenagers in zip codes of need. To me, a zip code is sort of it's too broad of a category, I think, as an identifying metric to measure demographic characteristics. I know even when we did enterprise zones, we looked at census tract data. And I think as part of Ms. Dotson's presentation in workforce development, she referred to some aspects of census tract analysis in hers. So why wouldn't we use, for more, at the more granular level, for more specificity, why wouldn't we use census tract analysis data instead of the broader category of zip code data?
I appreciate the question, and frankly, the zip codes of need has kind of just become shorthand. I think that, you know, these 6 particular YMCAs were ones that we focused on with CARES Act funding. And I believe if we did an overlay of these YMCAs with pockets of the community that are high poverty, high minority, if we did an overlay of these 6 YMCAs with our corridors of opportunity, that we would see a lot of alignment. And that was really what drove the conversation with the YMCA back during the CARES Act was resources are scarce. And, wouldn't it be great if we had enough resources to support all of the YMCAs and the programming they're doing with youth and teens? But let's focus in on the ones that are really embedded in parts of the community that have been most adversely impacted by the pandemic. And that's where we landed.
Mr. Phipps? Good. Mr. Bakari?
Thank you. I am appreciative that we're now level set and back here with council engaged, and that slide is the most important slide of the outcome of the last couple months, which is every one of those buckets paired with what phase they're in, and knowing that when we get them to our ultimately council discussion and approval, they're out the door. I'll just say now is the time for us to get aggressive on this. I mean, we have, these have been sitting around for 4 months now, and while there are definitely things that we need to do that take work, like the RFP, for example, we should have been doing that months ago. So my hope is that we don't come and have the same conversation again in January, and then February, we start getting those colors in that heat map to the ultimate ready for council color, and we get this money out the door in a transparent way that makes it to the areas, the small businesses, all the different places that it's needed. Because to be quite honest, we've not used 4 months as well as we could have to get to this point.
Ms. Ajmira? Ms. Ajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I agree with the comments that were made by Mayor Pro Tem about at least getting this $4 million out. As we know that organizations have been waiting for this fund, so the need is out there. So do you need a motion for us to get these dollars out, or?
No, we do not need a motion, Ms. Ajmira. The council has provided the manager the authority. He's giving this report tonight, and unless there is an objection to it, I think he's looking for some indication that the staff is on the right track, the money's going out the door as quickly as possible, and indicating that. And so we do not need a motion. I think that do you have any other comment or anything else?
No, I don't have any other comments. I just want us to get these funds out as soon as possible while the organizations are in truly need.
So they'll be coming back on a consistent basis with the other projects that are underway and in planning. And so, Mr. Winston?
No, that was our old hand up. I'm good.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jones?
Okay, so first off, I want to publicly thank Sean Heath for all the hard work that he's done, and also Pam in terms of housing, and Tracy and ED, and Ryan Bergman and Teresa Smith in terms of some of the things that we're doing internally as it relates to our employees. So just so that I understand what guidance we have tonight, can we go back to that table? So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with this. So I don't, Sean, the chart. So I think
the color-coded chart.
Yeah. So I'm very visual, and
we
Sean
can go back a few slides to the
gold as
color-coded.
green, and so I gotta make sure I got this right.
That's, when he refers to gold, it's something about that fraternity that he's in. I don't know about that.
So can we
Donata,
go
is
back
there?
to
Okay. Yeah, we need to go back a few slides.
There's the YMCA for $2 million, and there's the Hire Charlotte and Open for Business that's $1 million each, which would be.
Thank you.
Okay, so green, we're at the council discussion, the YMCA, and also the Hire for Charlotte and Open for Business, but there was also the mission, and I want to make sure that we're on the same page with that. And the mission, Sean, you talked about earlier, and that was a $4 million contribution, as well as sending out an RFP, which you'll still get information back, but an RFP with about $10 million. And Sean, can you explain a little bit what would be some of the opportunities with that RFP?
Yeah, I sure can. Yeah, I think that.
I want to make sure this is fine with you.
Clarification is always great.
So the 11.6 million ARPA HUD home allocation, 2 million of which is contemplated for the Charlotte Rescue Mission, 9.6 million, which would be tethered to the 2025 homelessness strategy. For the 9.6 million, we'd like to put an RFP out on the street as quickly as possible. And, just to give you an illustrative example, there are a number of community conversations around the notion of a hotel motel acquisition as an opportunity to get more permanent supportive housing into the local marketplace. So we would be anxiously awaiting RFPs along those lines. But as I mentioned before, ARPA HUD Home has 4 very discrete allowable uses. That is but one of the 4. And we don't want to assume that we know how the market will respond. So that's why we'd like to get an RFP out.
So, Mr. Jones, I'm going to say, you can see the green 3 items on this chart, but from the prior presentation, it is the approval of moving forward with the rescue mission, which deals with men and substance abuse and other issues, as well as sending out the RFP to support the housing strategy study that we have, housing and homelessness strategy. Mr. Driggs?
Yes, I just wanted to say about the whole subject of these authorizations, because I think we've kind of had a little bit of a disconnect as to what constitutes a go-ahead or what doesn't. So we can have one conversation that says we're going to use $17 million for this and $27 million for that, and that is a broad allocation decision. So you make that decision and you say, okay, these are the uses that we intend. Then you get down to who the money is being paid to and what exactly is being done. So I think with the green ones here, in my opinion, we're ready to go, right? So we know who gets that money, the Y gets that money, the mission gets that money, and so on. As you go through the other 60 and further to the indication on the slide, when you come to us and you say, this is the person or the entity I want to give the money to, and this is what they will do with it, that's where I think you'll have clarity about the fact that we're on board. And I'm speaking for myself, but this is just how I sort these things out in my mind. So as far as I'm concerned, we're good to go on the mission and the green items here, unless somebody, one of my colleagues, says otherwise, wants to say otherwise.
Yes, I would. I want to make sure that all the pain we went through to get to this point is, from a procedural perspective, is understood. I thought when I saw this color-coded page right here that everything was great, but back to what Mr. Driggs said, I mean, I'm fine with that. Is we just had the discussions on the greens and the 3 greens that are there, knowing who's getting the money and where it's going. But again, like, this needs to, in order for it to turn orange as endorsed, we have to vote on something, and it either needs to come back to us in the business agenda before it goes out the door. It can't be we point back to the illegal vote we took at the retreat and then, oh, okay, you guys are good with these rough head nods. Like, there has to be something formal that turns it from green to orange, or we're back where we started.
Mr. Bakari?
Get a clarification on that. I don't know that everybody agrees with you that it was an illegal vote. And I think that's the key, is we voted on it at the retreat. Our city attorney needs to clarify that, but I reject the idea that I was participated in an illegal vote, and I don't know that others feel that way. In which case, the manager had told us, and we will hold him to it, that he's got to tell us what's getting dispersed. And as we've said now, that $4 million that's ready to go needs to go out the door. So, Patrick, Mr. Baker, would you comment on that?
Sure. When I use the word illegal, what I am using that for is to say that you have violated a statute. You did not violate a statute when you made that vote in in Winston-Salem on this particular issue. The issue that I raised at the last time we discussed this is procedurally, and these are your council rules of procedures. They're not ordinance, they're not statutes. These are your council rules of procedure. Talks about the idea of bringing agenda items, and agenda items need to be on the agenda or they can be added to the agenda. And when I think of an agenda item, I'm thinking of a request for council to make a decision on a particular matter. So that was the issue that was there was, and no one raised an objection at the time. In fact, there were two motions that were made on that particular day. This was one motion, then there was another motion later in the early afternoon relating to communications for the intergovernmental committee to work on some of the transit issues with the state government. And I butchered that entire motion there, but there were those two issues. Neither of them did any council member object to voting on it. You just voted on it going forward. So I didn't raise anything about it, but it's not an illegal vote in the sense that you violated a statute. But I would say that both of those issues were not consistent with your procedures, and that's an internal document for you to govern yourself on as opposed to a statute. I hope that the discrepancy is clear there.
So, but the fact that we all agreed to vote on it does that make that inconsistent with our policy?
It doesn't, particularly when no one brought it up. But had someone said, I didn't know that we were going to vote on this, should this even be on the agenda, which council has done that before, and you asked me my opinion, and keep in mind, my opinion is my opinion. It's not an edict. It's not, this is how it's going to be. But my opinion would have been that it's not consistent with your procedures. Your procedures say that agenda items need to be on the agenda. Those are going to be the items that you're going to vote on.
Unless the full council agrees that we'll vote on it.
Right. That requires unanimous consent, and that question wasn't brought up, and no one at that meeting said anything one way or the other.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that this has been hammered out, talked about, and I think that the use of the words and the advice of the attorney, I'm going to just conclude that the action that we have on tonight's agenda, unless in conflict with what we've done in the prior vote at the strategy session, as well as the prior authorization that we gave to the city manager, that we go ahead and proceed unless there is someone that objects to any one of these items, that we not take any action, then that's up to this council. Mr. Baker, I'm trying to be very clear that the use of the words matter, and the use of these words saying illegal versus following your procedure, because every time this council convenes, there's the opportunity for action.
Sure.
And if no one objects to the action, then it takes place. And whether or not, I think tonight is the issue of how do we proceed on 3 projects that have been presented from this list of $60 million in ARPA funding, whether or not we have the sufficient information that this council feels that we can make this decision. So with that,
can I make one more comment now?
Yes.
So I think the critical thing is, there was one item in there that seems to be the sticking point for everybody, the digital inclusion, but I think it's clear to me, and I hope to other council members and to the manager, that no one is going to go spend that money until you bring it back to us. And just like we could tonight, we could say, no, don't spend that $4 million in that way. We need to open up for discussion again. But we're not doing that tonight. We're saying, yes, with that $4 million, move forward, but everything else in the additional $54 million, because we have another 2, that still has to be brought before us, at least to sanction it, even if we're not voting on it, right? So I think that's our leverage on how that gets spent.
And if that's the case, I am fully behind that to be, if everyone else is, unanimous vote that we decision it tonight. But I don't want to set a precedent where the digital inclusion money then next week all of a sudden gets spent without our approval again.
asked that at the retreat also, and I haven't, I mean, that was my question at the retreat. If we're very clear that the manager does not have the authority, his authority goes to $500,000. So I don't see that you could even do that. It would be very egregious to find out staff spent $9.5 million without council knowing about it and having the council discussion. I'm comfortable with that. I don't know how my colleagues feel about that.
I think is my hand up?
Yes, your hand is up. I'm sorry, Mr. Bakari interrupted or followed up to, and have Mr. Graham followed by Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. I agree with the Mayor Pro Tem. I think that we've given the manager the leeway to provide a framework in terms of how those dollars are going to be spent. I'm very comfortable with the presentation and how we should proceed moving forward. Obviously, I think the council should operate at 30,000 feet and allow the manager to bring back the details for us. But I think we said on one hand that we want the money to go out the door quickly, and on the other hand, we're saying bring stuff back. And I'm saying that I think everyone's saying the same thing. The manager has his marching orders. He understands the framework in terms of how the money should be spent. And at the appropriate time, he'll come back and say, hey, this is my recommendations. And I'm pretty sure, I'm 95% sure that we all will probably nod and say, yeah, that's the direction that we need to go based on what we've done historically. So I think we're moving and tracking in the right direction. And I agree with everyone else. Let's not make this thing more complicated than it needs to be. Give the manager the framework to bring us back how this money should be spent so we can help as many people as we can. So I'm very comfortable moving forward. I do believe words matter. I'm going to address that again. But I'm very comfortable with the vote that was taken prior, and I'm very comfortable with the presentation being made tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Driggs?
Thank you. I just want to kind of reiterate what I said. We've got one level of decision that says we're going to spend $17 million towards a goal. And then we've got specific disbursements or contracts or other. I'm a little concerned about the notion that when you come back and say, pursuant to your decision to commit $17 million, I would like to enter into an agreement with so-and-so and pay $1.5 million. Is everybody okay with that? I think that does call for a vote. And I think to Mr. Bakari's point, we do have a decision about, we need clarity around when council has actually agreed that money goes out the door. And I don't think that saying we intend to commit $17 million to a purpose constitutes that decision. I believe that it constitutes an intent on our part, subject to a proper sort of referral to us of individual actions or expenditures that you offer. And so, again, tonight with these, given the urgency and so on, I wouldn't insist on it, but I do think that we shouldn't be too casual as we go through the remainder of the $60 million about, well, okay, here's 5. Everybody okay with that? It should be brought to us as a proposal, and we should vote on it. And that's the piece that I think we came away from the retreat not expecting, and that we thought we should be able to expect. So from your slide here, I feel comfortable that we're on track to do that. And so I just hope that there will be a vote when you have commitments that you want to make that involve writing a check out of the $60 million.
Mr. Winston? Mr. Winston?
Thank you. I think Mr. Bakari is right that by this slide, which this slide is very helpful, and this presentation has been very helpful, but in order to get from green to orange, from ready for council discussion to council endorsed, you do have to have a step where council actually endorses what the staff brings back to us. I think to Mr. Driggs's point, I think it's fairly simple. We can ask for unanimous consent, right? Because I think that's also what Mr. Baker is advising. Since there wasn't that request for unanimous consent to put on a voting item for us to vote on this, it wasn't necessarily correct vote under our rules and procedures. It was out of order. So what I would suggest is if for whatever reason, the staff does not want to produce a request for council action every time they bring us these green things to get us to orange, I mean, council can ask for unanimous consent. And if anybody objects, if any council member objects to that unanimous consent, like I think we're asking for with the $4 million and the other plans for the homeless dollars, then it's the prerogative of council members to kind of plead their case in a discussion like this, to ask for it to go back to committee or whatever it may be. So we do have that, that parliamentary procedure of dealing with these kind of swift but big actions and conversations that we need to have. Have I misrepresented anybody here? Or
Mr. Winston, I think you said that very well. So I think that where we are is there anyone, and this could have happened at any point along on any vote, unless if someone says, I would like to see it done differently, or I don't want to do this one, any council member has the right to do that. So I would say to you that the question really is there anyone that objects to moving forward with the 3 items that have been discussed, as well as the funding for the RFP? So that's the question that I think is before us now. So is there any objection by the council?
I have a question.
Is that okay with, is that what you're saying? Am I Mr. Winston? I just lost you.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, you captured exactly what I'm saying.
I just have a question before I answer that.
Answer. Do you have a question, Mr. Bakari?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. I am in full support of that. I believe because again, learning from our mistakes of the past, I want us to do this correctly. And I believe it's not, does anyone randomly have a concern? It's that, is there a motion that we take action that wasn't on our agenda and it's unanimous, of which I feel like it's going to be, including my vote on these items, and then we do it. But why that's important is that the manager said to us in our last meeting that the traditional practice of these federal dollars has not been to bring back RCAs on our normal agenda for approval. So
I'll ask for unanimous consent.
Second.
To endorse the green items to orange.
I second that, and I'll just continue with the point of this is the way this council needs to do this, where it's not a random show of hands. Is everyone cool? We follow our bylaws and our rules. We approve it coming out of the door unanimously, because these things haven't traditionally, millions and millions of dollars haven't traditionally been coming back to us. And if we don't start doing it right now, and this slide, Mr. Manager, is a great start. And it will be a perfect start if we make sure that when something turns green to orange, that we take the appropriate action, hopefully with enough notice that the community can weigh in. But in cases like this where we need to act swiftly, then that.
All right, you have a motion on the floor. Is that correct? And a second? So all in favor of the motion for unanimous support for the 3 projects that have been identified as green on this list, as well as the homeless, the money allocation for the homeless through the RFP, as well as the funding for the rescue mission. So with that, if you are in favor, please raise your hand. And I'm sorry, because we're virtual. Because we're virtual, we will have to go through a roll call vote.
Could you restate the motion again? I'm sorry.
Mr. Winston?
I ask for unanimous consent to turn the 3 items that are ready for council discussion to council endorse, and all of the additional. This is going to be. I asked. All right, let's do this right.
All right, I'll restate it, Mr. Winston, if this is okay. Of the community support recommendations that have been identified, ready to go, Hire Charlotte and Corridors Workforce Study, Open for Business Strategy, and fundings for the Youth Team Impact, as well as the allocation of money, $4 million for the rescue mission and for the allocation of funding for a request to support the homelessness and housing, affordable housing strategy plan that's being planned and adopted. And what we have is everyone in support of that. So I have a roll call vote for the motion to approve those items. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira.
Yes.
Mr. Bakari.
Yes.
Mr. Driggs.
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston.
Yes.
Mr. Graham.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Mayor, you didn't call for discussion, so I have a question about this motion. Okay? According to our procedures, we have to have unanimous vote in order to put something on the agenda that wasn't on the agenda. Is that what we're doing? I know this is on the agenda, but the vote wasn't on the agenda. So is this motion to put it on the agenda and then vote, or is it for the issue itself?
My motion is to put that on the agenda and vote for it all in one motion.
Okay. Yes.
All right, Mr. Phipps.
Yes.
Mr. Newton.
Yes.
Ms. Watlington. Ms. Watlington. All right, Mr. Winston.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. All right, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on our agenda for tonight is the State Transportation Improvement Projects Update. Mr. Jones.
So thank you, Mayor, and members of council. Again, we had Ms. Dotson, I guess a couple of weeks ago, talk a bit about some infrastructure improvements as related to Centene. A lot of discussion occurred, and what I committed to the council was to have the team come back and discuss a little bit about the State Transportation Improvement Projects update and how these two have some, I guess, cross-pollination. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over to Liz.
Great. Good evening, Mayor, Council, Manager Jones. As Mr. Jones said, I'm Liz Babson. I'm your Transportation Director, and tonight I'll be joined by Ed McKinney and Tracy Dodson. We're here to provide you that follow-up from the presentation that Tracy provided to you at last month's strategy session on the projects that are related to Centene development. I'll start by giving you an update on the state's TIP, and then Ed and Tracy will talk about the comprehensive transportation improvements that we've identified in the University City Park area and how a public-private partnership with Centene in this particular example really helps solve for some of the transportation issues in that area. Next slide, please. So the TIP, this is just a little reminder, the TIP is required by federal law, and that is the document that NCDOT uses to administer both federal and state highway trust funds that come from motor fuels taxes. The state has to develop a fiscally constrained plan at least every 4 years. NCDOT's practice is to do a 10-year plan, and that plan must then also be adopted by our local metropolitan planning organization, which is our CRTPO, or Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. So the currently adopted plan covers the period 2020 through 2029. The first 6 years of that plan in this version is what we refer to as the delivery of the STIP, and it's committed, which means those projects are funded through construction. The latter 4 years of that plan is what's called developmental, and that means that NCDOT has produced the next prioritized list of projects that will be funded for construction in an upcoming future TIP. Next slide, please. So NCDOT has recently announced that there are funding issues with the currently adopted 2020-2029 TIP. These issues come from a number of things. There were unanticipated costs resulting from the North Carolina MAP Act settlements. There's been significantly declining gas tax revenue, and there have been increases in project costs from what they originally budgeted. Next slide, please. And so on this slide, you'll see a summary of the state's TIP. This is for the entire state. What is highlighted in the red boxes are the funding associated with projects in the Charlotte area, specifically in our CRTPO. So for example, we have projects that fall in the statewide mobility program. We also have projects in Region E under regional impact, and then we have division needs under Division 10. And so in summary, the entire NCDOT 2020-2029 funding plan was originally budgeted at $11 billion. With new information based on the previous issues I just summarized for you, they are $11 billion over budget for the entire state. Next slide, please.
Can you go back? Do you want to do slides, individual slides? Because how do you want? Can we go back, Liz, just
Yes,
to that last slide? So out of this available funding, this is statewide, or is it just divisional?
This is statewide, so the entire TIP for North Carolina was originally budgeted for $11 billion. With new cost information, it is now at $22 billion. They are $11 billion over budget.
Can you tell us the time frame between those two numbers? Was it during the pandemic, or basically?
So they produce a TIP at least every 4 years. The last TIP was produced 3 years ago, and when that TIP was produced and adopted, that budget was $11 billion based on costs at that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for us with our next TIP? Again, the previous TIP was done in 2019, applied to the 2020-2029 timeframe with an $11 billion shortfall. As we move into adopting our next TIP, we know the state's going to have to make some tough decisions. In order to prepare for that, NCDOT has formed a work group to help develop framework to guide and make recommendations to the North Carolina Board of Transportation in the next year as they consider recommended changes to that 2020-2029 TIP and rolling those projects forward into what will next year be adopted as a 2024-2033 TIP. So we anticipate more details on that. Again, all we know at this time is there was an $11 billion plan that's a $22 billion plan, and so they're going to have to make some decisions. We anticipate that means they're going to look at phasing projects differently, pushing projects out, so there will be delayed construction schedules. And as we learn more about that, we will come back to you and share that information. We don't anticipate knowing anything with any level of detail until early summer of next year. Next slide, please. And so this is just a real quick reminder. As we think about this issue, it is pretty important to Charlotte as we consider transportation infrastructure improvements in the city, because what you see in green are city-maintained streets, what you see in red are state-maintained streets. While we do maintain more mileage than NCDOT, an important distinction is that they are actually responsible for about 50% of our thoroughfares. And that means those are the streets that are major traffic carriers and the most congested streets in the city. Next slide, please. All right. So just to summarize for you what that impact looks like to us in the way of the projects that are in the currently programmed TIP. The committed projects, as I mentioned before, are the ones that are in pink. This represents 25 projects and nearly $3 billion worth of investment. So we were a $3 billion portion out of that originally adopted $11 billion program. What's shown in green are the projects that they refer to as developmental projects. And again, those are the ones that they anticipated as their next highest priority. They weren't going to begin right-of-way acquisition until the later years of that 10-year funding document. And there were about 21 projects included in this group. We anticipate, given this current funding situation, that those projects in green are not likely to start until sometime after 2033. And this is important to point out because one of the projects that Tracy described to you that was part of that package with this Centene public-private partnership was the potential to do some transitional improvements on the interchange of Mallard Creek Church and I-85. That was a project that was identified as a future need in the current TIP, but we fully anticipate that interchange reconstruction, it will be pushed out far beyond 2033. Next slide, please. And so before I turn it over to Ed, I'll make another point about another project that we talked about related to this Centene development. The CRTPO, which is our local MPO, does receive discretionary funding. It comes directly to them from the FHWA. That money we have now confirmed is still intact. The CRTPO receives about $20 to $30 million each year, depending on funding availability from the federal government. We currently have 13 active projects in Charlotte that are being funded by those discretionary funds. And again, that North Bridge is one of those projects. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ed, and he can talk a little bit more in detail about how all of these pieces come together to provide that transportation infrastructure improvement in the University Research Park.
Thank you, Liz. If you go to the next slide, again, I'm Ed McKinney with the Charlotte Department of Transportation. What I want to do is just share with you some of the ongoing initiatives and some of the planning and work and collaboration we've been doing around mobility investment in the University Research Park area, sort of honing in a little bit more specifically on some of the things that Liz just teed up. If you go to the next slide. So I'm going to walk you through a few maps just to give you some context. What you're looking at now here is a view of sort of an overview of the University Research Park area. You see Interstate 85 kind of highlighted in the yellow. You've got the blue line highlighted in the blue. Just want to kind of give you that picture as you're looking sort of to the north. You see Centene, Wells Fargo, Innovation Park, TIA, just try to give you a little bit of that context. Couple things I want to mention as we've been thinking about the mobility planning for this area. One thing that I think Council will be very familiar with is we are seeing lots of change. You've just in the last couple of years and literally in just this last month, you've approved a recent rezoning. Innovation Park is one you just approved just this last month. And so you're seeing a tremendous amount of land use change that's really going from a suburban single-use office environment to a more mixed-use kinds of place. Innovation Park was a great example. That was taking that single-use office park and beginning to envision what that could look like with residential, with retail, with other office, really transitioning to the kind of place that University City has always envisioned this area should be. That does, though, create some very interesting challenges from an infrastructure standpoint. And so what I'll sort of, with an oversimplification, the question really is, how should we invest? Think about it in two very simple buckets: the transit and how do we take advantage of and extend the reach of the Blue Line. And at the end of the day, it's still a suburban place. It has and relies on the regional access of our road network. So how do we partner on that transportation investment? So think about those two things and let me share with you some thoughts about how we're doing that. The next slide starts to paint that picture. So if from a transit standpoint, what we're trying to do is extend the reach of the Blue Line. What you see on this map is things that the city has already done and is already underway. So all the blue lines, these green and light green lines, are sort of the network of both existing greenways, existing bike and pedestrian facilities, planned greenways, several bike facilities that are currently in the process of being implemented. And hopefully what you see and what you get from that is the picture of we've done and are doing lots of things to connect that great investment that we've made in those two stations, particularly in this part of University City, to connect it across 85, get it to the employment, get it to where we're seeing this pretty dramatic land use change. The North Bridge, you see that on the top of your page. I'll mention that because Liz just talked about that. The South Bridge is in place at the bottom of this image. The North Bridge is the one that's in process, Liz just mentioned. You can see how important those two bridges are and how important particularly that north one will be to make sure that we're providing and really getting some great opportunity to get multimodal, vehicular transit connectivity between the investment we've made in transit and ultimately the change and growth we're seeing in the University Research Park area. Next slide shows you what's also in the works. And so giving a lot of credit to University City Partners who have been leading this discussion with the area employers, with the university, with other partners like the county and CATS as to how could we also not just extend the reach of this transit system through walking and biking and multimodal facilities, but could we use the bridge, for example? In this case, this red line sort of represents a conceptual idea of how you might connect from the J.W. Clay station, for example, with a shuttle system that would connect across, use that future new bridge, connect to the employment opportunities like Centene, Wells Fargo, Innovation Park. You've heard some of the discussions at these rezonings, and I think Tracy has talked about it before, the notion of a mobility hub where you'd have sort of stations essentially that provide multimodal infrastructure that are connecting you to the greenways, shared mobility options, scooters, and other infrastructure that, again, extend that reach and connect the employment and growth that's happening to the infrastructure that we put in place with transit. So that gives you the notion of both some things that we have done in place and some great new things and some new thinking that's being led around mobility hubs and transit connectivity with partnership with these area employers. Let's now transition to the road network and that transportation. If you go to the next slide, so here the question is, how do we partner on that transportation network? What you see here is sort of highlighted as sort of a version of the map that Liz just showed. If you think of everything that you see here in yellow, that was red on Liz's map. And so this is, basic, the most important kind of transportation infrastructure for this area. But again, it's all part of the state regional system. That's an important driver for how we think about investment and partner for investment in this area. So we really used Centene as really inspiration that said, when that project and opportunity came along, we said, why don't we take the bigger view, the bigger picture? Let's not look at that project as simply another development and how would we plan for and mitigate for its impact. Let's understand that lots of things are happening. Centene is a great catalyst. Let's look at the bigger picture and plan for what we think mobility should look like, both in the short and long term. So that bigger picture is everything from short, mid, and long, and also looking at all of our partners, private, public, state, city. And so really what we did is sort of designed a study that said, let's take all the planned projects, all the zoning activity, all the development activity, let's understand the impacts of those projects, what they were already committing to, and let's look at what's the as you have talked about and talked with us before about these kinds of projects. Let's look at the cumulative impact of that and what is in this case what is sort of that missing opportunity. So we captured all the private projects and all the development that was going on. We analyzed that. We took Centene on top of that. We looked at in context to the longer transportation investment that we'd be making from a city and state standpoint and said, okay, what could we do in the midterm? Really evaluating that cumulative need. What are some opportunities that didn't get identified just on a project by project analysis? And what were some valuable things that we could do in advance of and sort of supporting the longer term investment, really targeted to some projects and public-private opportunities. So next slide just gives you a sense of what that focus was. We ultimately took all that information, looked at both the long and the short term, focused on two corridors. The really important here is that access to 85. So the Mallet Creek Church Road corridor getting you to 85 and access to the Research Park area, the W.T. Harris Boulevard, those two corridors and their access to 85 became really important. We ultimately identified two key projects. And again, I want to emphasize what this is and what it isn't. It's really targeted and not triggered by any one development. So you can look at all the entitlements that we've created. We didn't double up on that. We said, what if we built upon that and what would be missing? What's that cumulative impact? And so these are projects that wouldn't have gotten triggered by any one development, even Centene. They needed to be targeted and feasible. So we wanted to do things and identify things that made sense to partnership and find partnership on. And so we wanted to make sure that the things that made sense in the short term and didn't preclude the longer term investment. And then obviously at the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that they had important operational benefits. So long story short, to come to conclusion, two projects really did come to the fore, and that was really the Claude Freeman intersection and some targeted improvements at the I-85 and Mallard Creek Church interchange. The Claude Freeman intersection is really around building out what that intersection could be, providing great and better local access between Mallard Creek Church Road and all of the development that's happening within the research park itself. And then the interchange were some very strategic, some very targeted things that we found in partnership with the state that identified some ways to really capture capacity out of the existing infrastructure. Some very unique and targeted things that we did that added capacity without expanding the bridge and really keeping in the long term the view that we're going to be investing in that interchange over the longer term horizon. This was some investment we could do in the short term. Real quick to say on Harris Boulevard, as you can imagine, there's still some bigger questions to be had. There wasn't a good, simple, targeted set of projects, that criteria of things that could be feasible and had operational improvement. We're still working with development and with the state to think through those projects. At the end of the day, these two projects, the Claude Freeman and the I-85 interchange, became really what we thought were really valuable projects to suggest to the team and really to hand over to Tracy and her team to think about how we might implement and partner on those two key investments. So with that, certainly can take questions, but this is a good transition to Tracy to talk about how to take those two projects and develop a partnership for their implementation.
Ms. Johnson and Mr. Bakari.
Ms. Johnson, questions for Ed?
Well, yeah, thank you. I may be able to wait until the end, but I'm so happy to see this. I'm surprised as the district rep I wasn't given a briefing prior to tonight's meeting, but I am excited about it. I did want to ask, and maybe you'll go into this, Tracy, there's an area off Mallard Creek that there's a huge rezoning that's proposed, Kings Grant. And one of the reasons I've been concerned about it is the impact on the infrastructure and the fact that that area is not ready for that large industrial or manufacturing or warehouse development. One of the arguments has been that it's proposed, there's a proposed improvement through the state. Well, now we know based on this presentation that that's moved back to possibly 2033. So hopefully what you're going to discuss is a solution for that, because that's a huge rezoning that I've been publicly concerned about the Kings Grant development, because Mallard Creek in that area is only 2 lanes. So I'd like to know if there is a short-term solution, or if this exciting new infrastructure bill, bipartisan bill that was passed, if we as a city, or if we could talk to the intergovernmental team or something, if we're looking to support such a transformative development in this area, then what are we doing to support the infrastructure so that residents aren't burdened with the traffic that we know is going to come from that? Thank you.
He lowered his hand.
Ms. Ajmera?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a couple of questions. So, do we have a list of projects that are going to get delayed as a result of this budget issues that NCDOT is facing? Can we get a list of those projects?
Yes, ma'am. Councilman Ajmera, we do not have that list at this time. The NCDOT has commissioned the work of a work group that's made up of representatives from across the state. We're fortunate in that one of our CRTPO staff sit on that work group. They will be making recommendations to the Board of Transportation in January for a framework by which the board and NCDOT can use to look at what the impacts and schedules to existing projects will be.
Okay. So how many board members are in that advisory committee?
I can get you that number. The work group would not be appointed officials. The NCDOT Board of Transportation are the appointed officials, and so we can get you that information.
Well, it's good to hear that we have representation on that. So hopefully that will result into fair and equitable infrastructure investments across the state.
I think, Ms. Ajmir, it's going to be tough because the DOT people are the managers of that. I think they're just going to be working to react and reflect. So I don't want it to be overstated that we could look for real results. Hopefully, yes, but just don't want to say that that's a guaranteed outcome.
Fair enough. I'm trying to figure out from the overall perspective, what does this mean for our region, right? As one of the fastest growing in the state, especially the impact on the projects in the pipeline. So you gave an example of Centene. Was that part of the committed or developmental project? Where was that project before city decided to contribute half the cost towards it?
So the interchange reconstruction was a future identified need, what they refer to as developmental. So they were going to do feasibility work in the latter years of the 2020-2029 TIP. And
got it. So it wasn't even part of committed.
No.
So Liz Babson and your team at McKinney, I appreciate the work that you do, trying to find ways to address the needs we have in our region for infrastructure, to address congestion, traffic, while balancing the growth. I appreciate that you find all the ways you can to address the need, but I think we cannot, the underlying issue of state NCDOT budget issues, that unless and until that is addressed, we are still going to be struggling. So, I mean, that's still an underlying issue. So while we try to figure out all this public and private partnership, which is great, but really this is coming from our local dollars that's really state's responsibility at the end of the day. So I'm all for public-private partnership, but at the end of the day, we got to ensure that state also picks up their tab and addresses the need in terms of the budget crisis that they have. So Ms. Johnson brought up a really good point around the rezoning that's coming up. And that's the industrial rezoning that's going to create a lot of jobs for our region. And I know that Ms. Johnson had raised a concern around the infrastructure. What is the status on that? And is that part of our committed or developmental project pipeline?
So I'm not sure which project you're referencing and if there was an NCDOT funded project associated with that or not.
The answer is yes, there was an NCDOT funded project, and the petition number is 2021-028.
Yes, ma'am. So if it is a funded project under NCDOT's currently adopted TIP, then that project, as I just described earlier, is going to go through some changes to either its phasing or its schedule, given the current shortfall that NCDOT has. And we don't know what that will be at this point.
Okay, so that we won't know till January. However, we have to make a decision on that rezoning soon.
Yes, ma'am. And it won't be January. In January is when the work group makes recommendations to the board. So we probably won't know for a full 4 to 6 months until after that point.
Okay. Ms. Babson, if there is an opportunity like we have done with Centene to work with private sector to see what we can do to address infrastructure needs. And that's just the one example. I'm sure across the city we have so many more projects like this where it all requires funding. And I just really don't know what does that mean for our local taxpayers' dollars, right? What does that mean for other needs that we have for our CIP? You know, if we keep trying to fill this gap and fill this void that we have, it's a very complex problem to solve. I guess that's why we are elected, but it's just challenging that we keep trying to fill the gaps that's really the state should be addressing. So it's very frustrating, but I certainly appreciate Liz Babson, your team's effort in addressing and coming up with creative solutions like you have done here. So thank you, and that's all I have.
Thank you. I will remind you as well that through congestion mitigation, that's a capital program that council supported in 2020 and again is recommended for 2022. That gives us the opportunity to do exactly what you're describing and what you've heard here tonight on a much smaller scale, but it allows us the opportunity to partner when development comes into an area and we can add turn lanes at an intersection, for example.
So, Ms. Babson, I understand, but that's just a drop in the ocean.
Yes, it is.
You know, how many more do we have? We don't know, right? If we keep filling the void, I'm sure there will be a point in time where we're going to have to keep filling that bucket because state is not addressing the gap that we have here. So,
and Ms. Ajmir, I doubt seriously if they're going to do that. I had the opportunity to talk to Mayor Higdon and Matthews, and they've already told him that their super road that they had planned for years off of Independence is the same issue. And this is going on across the state. I have Mr. Winston, but I wanted to make sure, Mr. Winston, we were going to have Ms. Dotson go through the information on Centene a little bit more. Do you want to comment before or after Ms. Dotson?
I just had a quick comment. I definitely think we should think about during the budget time dealing with this issue and from a policy standpoint. But Mr. McKinney, when he had the map of the Mobility Hub partnership, there's an entertainment district off the Blue Line, pretty close to where this picture is right now. I think it would be a mistake if we didn't consider connecting that mobility hub and network to that entertainment district. Just wanted to put that note out there. With that, my comments are done. We can continue on.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I just have a general comment that came from the NC First Commission that we wrapped up this past year. We're only talking about the cost overruns that from 11 billion to 22 billion for our projects in the STIP, but we're not, and everybody's got cost overruns, but we're not even addressing the fact that revenue is continuing to decline statewide. 61% of the state's revenue comes from the highway gas tax, and it's continuing to decline. So one of the statistics that we were given in our presentation was that we would need another $7.4 billion to bring us just up to the national average of what states spend on transportation, on roads and bridges, maintaining and building new. That's almost equal to what our budget is now. So that's almost doubling what we have, and we don't have a funding source for that. So we can say that it's the state's responsibility, but I think ultimately we have to say, if they're not going to do it, then what are the most important priorities in that STIP that aren't going to get funded in the near future? The NC First Commission recommended another $2 billion a year. The need is $20 billion over 10 years. and no action was taken at all by the General Assembly. So fair to say that money's not there, and we can say that it should be there, but it's not going to come. So I really do think we need to focus on what is critical for us in our region to invest in, so that we can continue to have development and continue to connect people safely. And with that, I'll ask further on, but I'm just going to put it out there now. If we do decide to fund this ourselves, one of the benefits is that we could say we want better pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure to be part of that. In the STIP, there's a very limited amount of money that could go for the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. And so we could look at it and say, we know we have a problem up there. You're taking your life into your hands trying to get over to the Blue Line if you're in that innovation area and you're riding a bike or you're walking, or up in the areas that we're talking about. So I would like to know, as you move along, what could we add there to make sure that we have really great pedestrian and bicycle connections? Thank you.
All right, Ms. Dodson, let's go with.
Thank you. If we can go to the next slide. Before I start, I want to go back to January of 2020 in the City Council retreat. Ty and I got up together and we did a presentation about CIP dollars. As part of that, we talked about different areas of our city and thinking about it's not an either or in our investment, but it's a both and. But it's how we go about making the investments differently. So in certain areas of our city, like University, like Ballantyne or South Park, where you have a lot of private investment, we can seize the opportunity with that private sector to leverage the private investment and minimize the public investment. However, other parts of our city, such as our corridors of opportunity, we're going to have to make more upfront investment where we don't have necessarily right out of the gate the private investment, specifically around infrastructure. So we've been kind of working on this for the past couple of years to look for these partnership opportunities. And we think that this is a good one, that one gets something that, as Liz said, would not be delivered by the state in this decade. And then two, one that's not even on the list of the state, that's on Mallard Creek and Claude Freeman. And so we see a need and a greater benefit to the larger Research Park area and University City area. With that, can we go to the next slide? So I'm not going to go back through everything with Centene, but I do want to just reiterate something that we talked about last month, is they put a focus on mobility. They love their campus, but they recognize the need to be able to connect people to the campus and the research park by multiple modes, and that is bike and transit and roads. And they want to be a leader and a partner in helping us figure that out, especially around this last mile discussion. Next slide. So as we've discussed already tonight, there were two projects that we were targeting: the Mallard Creek interchange, Mallard Creek Church interchange at 85, as well as Mallard Creek Church and Claude Freeman. I mentioned earlier that Claude Freeman intersection would never get on the STIP, and I'm kind of looking at Liz and Ed on that. And it's a state road and a city road connection. And then also what Liz mentioned earlier is the importance of the new bridge over 85 staying on track and what that does in that last mile connection. Next slide. So to give you a little bit more detail on each one of these, the Claude Freeman intersection is $8.9 million roughly, and the 85 interchange has two parts to it, but is a little over $4.5 million in total. We've looked at these together. We approached them with Centene as two separate projects, but kind of one bigger package that we would consider partnering with them on, because as Ed did his analysis, we determined that really both of these were needed. You did the interchange, that was great, but you're still going to have some congestion issues at Claude Freeman. If we could do both, we could have a lot bigger impact on that. Next slide. So since our last conversation, here's how I've changed a little bit how we're proposing potentially making our investment. The two projects together are $13.4 million. What we're proposing is putting more of our money towards Claude Freeman, having Centene fund all of the 85 interchange plus the remainder of Claude Freeman. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, we can split this up in a lot of different ways, but if it feels better, we're investing our CIP dollars in a project that is not on STIP, that most likely would not get on STIP. And then the private investment is funding the interchange. Next slide. So moving forward, what we would like to propose is to come back next week for a council action. Really, it's for the reimbursement of up to 50% of the construction costs. And again, that's when I total both of the projects together. And our reimbursement would focus on Claude Freeman. This, it's critical. The critical path of this is the timing. They're out there. They're mobilized right now. They can complete this work by August of next year. Remember what Liz talked about with the interchange. That was in a planning phase that probably got pushed out and decades away. I'm looking at Liz for confirmation on that. Thank you. The North Bridge continues to move forward. These things in play together. Again, Mayor Pro Tem, with thinking about other modes of transportation, allow us to think about connecting the research park and transit in a more cohesive way. And allows us to work with the partners that Ed mentioned, the employers out there, Centene, as well as University City Partners on developing a mobility plan. And with that, I will stop to see if there's any questions.
Okay, so you have before you, one of the reasons that we have the strategy session is to talk about things that are coming up, and right before you tonight is the idea of scheduled to come before council on December the 13th, next week, for reimbursement of 50% of the costs, up to $6.5 million. And the city reimbursement will focus on Claude Freeman, that intersection that's in the middle of the map there. So questions, Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, so I'm still waiting on my questions to be answered. So let me ask you, Tracy, since you're at the podium. University City Partners has been working on the last mile transportation for a long time, a couple years, and there were employers that were interested in contributing, such as the other large employers in the university area. I'm thinking of Wells Fargo and TIAA. I don't know if there were others, but there was a plan in motion prior to the Centene relocating to the city. So when this was presented last month, I think I asked, has there been a conversation to coordinate those efforts? Can you give me an update on that? Are those other employers involved in this, or is this?
Everybody has been at the table for this discussion. I'm focusing tonight on Centene because they're offering to do a significant piece of some of the road work that we need out there. But we're not starting fresh on this conversation about mobility. University City Partners has absolutely been at the table with their board members, with other employers, to talk about this mobility and how do we all achieve it together.
So do they need that large of an investment from the city if there are other employers that are willing to invest? I mean, I guess that's what I'm asking.
I think the conversations with the other employers have been things around how can we partner with CATS to do a shuttle, not, hey, I'm Wells Fargo and how do I help build out the infrastructure. With Centene, it's really about them being out there for several years and being under construction and being mobilized. They can deliver something faster and cheaper than if we were going to go out there and do it ourselves.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. So as far as the infrastructure, I asked the question earlier about Kings Grant and Mallard Creek, and I know that there are other areas that need focused on, but this seems like an extraordinary situation since we are looking at 287 acres of development behind Concord Mills Mall, where we know there's already 3-hour waits to get out of the parking lot. So I think this is something that my colleagues just can't ignore. If we know there's not going to be any improvement until 2033 and no discussion on it until January. I think for the residents of Charlotte in this area is something we have to think about and not, put our head in the sand, to these other issues on zoning Mondays. So I would ask if there's anything that we as a city can do in that area. I love that Centene has stepped up to the table. If maybe the developer for that project can help with the infrastructure in that area, it could be a good project. There's housing, there's jobs, but we cannot ignore what this is going to do to the traffic in that area, to the residents in District 4. So if we can, put our heads together, Centene, this is an awesome solution. There's private-public partnerships. How can we recreate that, or how can we implement that type of partnership or that type of solution for this large development? I mean, even the place type has been changed from that area to industrial or what, right now. So I know the city's really behind this King's Grant project, but we can't, the residents should not have to carry this burden until 2033. So I am just asking, I'm ringing the bell. We need help in order for this project to be beneficial as far as the infrastructure in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. I think my next, is there another Mr. Griggs?
I thought I remembered that we talked about this situation before, and these numbers look different. Are these the same numbers we talked about last time?
We've updated some of the cost estimates, so they're slightly different, but pretty close. I have the number that we're asking for in the CIP has not changed. The project numbers on the total amounts changed slightly.
Over how many years would the CIP money be needed?
2 bond cycles.
2 bond cycles. And that was a lot just now. I'm sort of struggling to get my arms around everything we just heard, but is the gist of this that we can kind of activate development potential by installing, by making these investments near term, that we can, or?
I think the purpose with us, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what great partners Liz and Ed have been in this. When we have these opportunities, such as a project like Centene that comes in and is so large, do we let it just go its normal process, what it might be short-term, what I think what Ed called out as short-term improvements, which are turn lanes here, turn lanes there, or do we really ask, can we partner with them to get bigger infrastructure achieved? That it's not just paving the way for new development, but it's keeping this as a viable employment center and trying to mitigate some of the congestion that's out there right now. Keeping it open so we can support the employment growth. When Centene first announced, the CEO was talking about 3,200 jobs. By the time we got to the actual announcement, he was talking about 6,000 jobs out there. So, being able to have these opportunities where we can partner, I think keeps a place like the Research Park in University City as a viable employment center. And that's what we want to stay ahead of it rather than having to try to catch up to it.
Are there other situations, given the state's funding situation, are there other situations where we might feel that the fact that the state can't fund might be a reason for us to do so? Are we going to have more asks like this anywhere else in Charlotte?
I don't have any more like this right now in my radar. I mean, there could be more. We've started to work with the manager as well as budget to think about how our CIP dollars are, and can we be, just like with Ballantyne, can we have some CIP dollars that are nimble, that allow us to work with the market where we can leverage more private investment with our CIP investment. And this is another opportunity that was like that.
But the difference here is that this is technically a state project that we're talking about paying for. I mean, does the road belong to us, or does the bridge belong to us, or who owns it?
The Mallard Creek Church is a state road.
You what?
Mallard Creek Church is a state road. It's a state-owned road.
And would own whatever we build with our CIP as well?
I guess that's the way it would work, yeah.
So this is kind of a gift to the state.
It's
or us.
Or us. It's staying ahead of our congestion.
Not coming this year from the
Okay, I
state.
know. I just
funny.
I see that we have an interest and that I see benefits to us, and I'm a little concerned about the precedent, I guess, and about whether the state would perceive this as a reason to allocate other money away from us on the assumption that if it's really critical, we'll figure it out.
Well, and again, as I said, if we want to rationalize it, we're putting our investment in Claude Freeman. That's nowhere on the state's radar as a needed project. So if you get Centene's investment to go into the interchange, the private sector is taking care of something for us decades ahead of when the state could even potentially get to it. And then we're making our investment at Claude Freeman, which, yes, it is a state road. It connects to a city road, which would never qualify for state funding. And I'm looking at the experts over here to weigh in on that. I wouldn't say never, but not likely. Okay, thank you.
Not likely, because it would have to get to the district level, and the district level is always just a lane or an intersection or something like that, and this would be bigger than that. So,
So this is effectively like a Ballantyne Reimagined type of investment with this wrinkle that the state is involved, which wasn't the case there.
Well, Ed, I don't want to put you on the spot. Did any of our Ballantyne Reimagined, since Johnson Road is a state road, did any of our Ballantyne Reimagined money go on a state road?
What, Providence Road West or Ardrey Kell or one of those? Or,
Sorry, put you on the spot.
Yes, in the Ballantyne example, there were, and I don't have all the projects now memorized anymore, but I used to. There are several projects that essentially overlap, just like these do, on state-maintained roads. And again, it was a part of this, almost a very similar strategy and study that identified the improvements and ultimately the funding partnership.
and, what kind of investment are we anticipating could occur there? I mean, I'm trying to get a feel for the site, and are we talking hundreds of millions of dollars of private investment that we think will be facilitated or enabled by our investment in?
Well, I think I know of other investments that are coming down the pike. One that's probably approximately $400 million that hasn't announced yet in this area. I think, as I mentioned, like with Centene, that's $1 billion investment on their campus. But I think what it helps to do is have them have the growth on their campus. So it's not necessarily new investment, but it's more opportunity on their campus. And again, as Ed pointed out, there's congestion everywhere around here that we need to be thinking about. And so for me, when I was looking at this with Centene, one, they were willing to come to the table and make this investment. But two, how do we keep the research park and University City as a healthy employment center? And the congestion is going to be one of the big issues for this area.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, I think, and I don't know if we can get the answer today, but generally when we bid these contracts and we instead have something that would move more quickly, the percentage of savings on the bidding and the, what do you call it, onboarding for all of that, is that like a single digit or is it in the lower double digits? Do we have an idea?
I wouldn't know general services.
Okay. If we could get that, because I think some of this ought to be quantified in a way that their direct costs and their indirect savings as well, opportunities that we may have as a result of this. And I just really believe that when Centene came, as Tracy said, it was going to be 3,000 people. Then all of a sudden it's like 4, and it's going to go to 6. So when we look at this, a lot of this is about current on-the-ground plans in addition to all of the development that continues. So even if, I don't know what King's Grant encompasses, but there's going to be growth out there. It's beginning to change in terms of how the University Park was planned with, low buildings that were 1 and 2 stories spread out. It is now becoming a much more dense, and I think at some point this is all going to cause backup, even worse for congestion, and I don't know how far. I mean, just look at IKEA and the interchange that we built there and how that relieved what was going on 85 when that decision was made. So I think that we ought to look at some of the numbers that we have to quantify the indirect costs that we might be able to save, as well as recognizing the growth in mobility that's already planned on the ground in that area. So if we can have some of those projections at 6.5 million of reimbursement, or whatever our share would be, what did I have? Our share would be focused on the 8.9 million. I think we ought to really try to look at those numbers and make them inclusive.
Great.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, you hit on what I was going to say, that there's an opportunity cost to not doing this, and that's where we really have to focus on what we're unlocking, and also what kind of investments those companies will then make in the mobility, at the red with the circles, the mobility hubs, because if we're not, let's acknowledge that it really stinks that we're not going to get this from the state in the near future, but it is what it is. And I was wrong. State budget's $5 billion a year for transportation. So it's just not there. What are we missing by not investing? And I'm not saying this is, well, I do think it's a good consideration to have, but I worry more about what we're not going to get if we're not willing to invest in this area.
Mm-hmm. So I think if there are no, Ms. Ajmera has a question. Ms. Ajmera?
Yes, I have a question. So this $6.5 million, that's our portion. Is that coming out of the public-private bucket that was part of our budget?
That is correct.
Okay, so no additional. What is the total amount that was in public-private bucket?
It was over the series of years, and I don't have it right in front of me. I was like, looking at the manager, 11, 26, 12, and then 13 or something like that. I can't remember exactly how it was spread up over 4 different bond cycles. And so a lot of times when I do have these projects and these opportunities, that's why you will hear me trying to split it up over multiple bond cycles so that we can have multiple projects within a single bond cycle.
Yeah, if we can get what was allocated for next 2 bond cycles for our public-private bucket in our follow-up report, that would be great. I just want to make sure that I emphasize the point here. I'm all in support for public-private partnership. At the same time, we still have a lot of our local projects that we also need to address in terms of street lights, sidewalks, bike lanes. So if we keep filling the void that we have, what does that mean for our city projects? Thanks.
Mr. Jones would like to address your question, Ms. Ajmera.
So thank you, Councilmember Ajmera. And I think you're making the point with this public-private partnership that we can be nimble, that there are funds set aside in the CIP that didn't exist before we looked at these next 4 bond cycles. And our dynamic budget director just sent me the numbers for the next 4 bond cycles. And what we have set aside is $11 million in the 2022 bond, $26 million in the 2024 bond, $13 million in the 2026 bond, and $26 million in the 2028 bond. So what Tracy's doing, each time projects like this come about, she's trying to see how she can spread them across the bond cycles.
Oh, got it. So that 11 million, 26 million, and so on also includes some of the partnership infrastructure with Atrium for Innovation District. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
All right, Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, I mean, this intersection at I-85 and the Meadow Creek Church Road has been a problem way before Centene. I mean, even the Top Golf, their initial site was at that intersection almost until it was moved over by IKEA. And you know, I think having a strong company like Centene to partner with, to me, is just an opportunity we could ill afford to not take advantage of, unless we are content with living with the timeline of the state that took, I don't know how many years for them to complete the I-485 around the city of Charlotte to get that road completed. And that road, you know, even at the intersection of Mallet Creek Road there, that road was put there to generate and help spur commerce in that area. So for those roads and infrastructure investments to be put there, they were meant to be used. And I think that this presents a golden opportunity for us to partner so as not to wait to perpetuity to get something done. And companies like Centene and others, you know, they just can't ill afford to be able to sit around and wait for something for as long as the state has been notoriously indicative of their, you know, ability to move forward with projects. So I think that we should give some serious consideration to this partnership as it exists, or potential that it would exist to help us move this project and these infrastructure projects forward.
So if there are other questions, this is going to be on the agenda next Monday. And with that, if there are any other questions, please get them to Tracy or the manager. And you've heard some of the opportunities to get some additional information from tonight. So with that, thank you very much for the discussion. So,
Mayor, my hand is up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. I just want to say for the record that I support, I love the Centene idea. It's creative, it's nimble. My concern is with the other areas. And I had asked the question before the presentation. So I would ask the city manager to be thinking of ways that we can implement this type of strategy or find some additional dollars for large projects like the one we're looking at considering next week. And that's all I'm saying. District 4, I think, is second in jobs only to Uptown. So we need solutions like this. This research park area is a huge economic driver. And to be able to have a last mile solution from the train to the research park or that whole jobs area, we certainly need that. So I applaud Centene for this creative solution. My concern is outside of that. My concern is the growth in the infrastructure, specifically with the 287 acre project on a 2-lane highway. So if there is a 2-lane state-owned highway, so if there's any solution, I'm asking you, Marcus, Tracy, if there's anything that can be considered prior to the decision next week before we make this decision that's going to have such a great impact, or if that petition can be deferred until after that committee meeting. So I'd like to talk about that more offline.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so thank you very much for the presentation. Again, the vote will be on the 13th. All right, so the next item on our agenda is the council committee report outs. If you don't have, you know, there are a couple of things that I wanted to say about this today. In the past, we've just kind of had committee report outs, but I wanted to say this is what we have talked about as a procedure for when we have the committee report outs, that you report out a question or a concern or a final recommendation to your colleagues, and that we have the opportunity tonight to discuss that and adjust anything that the committee is recommending, or, you know, adding something that you think it needs to be additional, or even taking away something. And if there's agreement that's ready to move forward on the agenda, then we do that. If it's a recommendation being made and everybody says, I'm cool with it, then it goes to the agenda for an action. If there's not agreement, then we actually ask the questions that the committee can go back and handle the questions of the council. So I'm not sure how many of those will come up tonight, but again, the committees are to provide recommendations going forward. And so with that, we have the first one I was going to say was Mr. Driggs on our Budget and Effectiveness Committee, Effective Governance Committee, because we've talked about a calendar for our budget in the upcoming year, and I believe that the committee has met and has a recommendation. So with that, but he stepped out of the room, so why don't we go, I'm going to say, okay. All right, Mr. Driggs, on time. So I just went through this long thing about committee recommendations are for discussion. If the council agrees, we move forward on the item to the agenda. If the council has other comments, then that goes back to the committee. And you're up first because you have the budget calendar for the upcoming year.
Right. So do you want me to talk about that?
Yes, and it's a recommendation to go to the council for approval. Is that correct?
Right. I did want to just spend a minute on the audit report. Are we not doing that?
No, we can do all of it. No, you can have all. I was just trying to get the budget calendar out because it's an action item.
All I wanted to say about the audit report was that we did get a report from the external auditors, and they highlighted 5 key opinions that were provided in their report: financial statements, internal controls over financial reporting, 2 opinions over federal and state single audits, and lastly, the passenger facility charges. All 5 resulted in an unmodified or clean opinion, which is the highest opinion that can be given under the required auditing standards. So that is very good news. There were a couple of issues related to, smaller issues, in my opinion, related to significant deficiency, which had to do with our tracking the reporting that was being done in conjunction with the use of coronavirus relief funds. No suggestion of any misappropriation of funds or improper action. This was really just because we were moving very quickly and some of the steps that were supposed to be taken hadn't been. The auditors caught that. And a non-material non-compliance finding. In any case, the bottom line on this is an outstanding result from the auditors, and congratulations are due to the staff, to everybody. So please tell everyone from us an excellent result. The budget schedule, the committee considered 2 options for a timeline in which to deal with the budget, and the issue here was that because of our election schedule having changed the way it did, we had an overlay of the timeline for the election and the timeline for the budget that could have resulted in some difficulties, and in particular could have resulted in a new council coming in and within 2 weeks being asked to approve a budget, where the new members really would have had no opportunity to get familiar with our budget process or the particular items in the budget. So it was felt that it was better to have the current council approve the next budget, and therefore 2 timelines were considered that would have allowed that to happen, would have allowed the budget vote to take place on the 23rd. One of them was more condensed and involved only 2 budget workshops, and the other one was somewhat more extended and had 3 budget workshops in it prior to the election. The committee decided that the staff recommended timeline, which was option 2, was, in the opinion of the committee, the preferred one. So our recommendation to full council will be that we adopt option 2, which is in the materials that were handed out in a vote next week.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Driggs. Does anyone have any questions on this committee before we move on?
Yes, Ms. Johnson.
Ms. Johnson?
No, she kept her hand up. It's okay.
But I have to take my hand down. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, Ms. Watlington?
Yes, thank you. I just want to make sure I understand. I'm trying to compare this to the strategy session calendar that laid out the budget and also the seating of the next council. Where does that fall on this schedule?
The strategy session schedule? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
What I'm asking is, when we went to Winston-Salem, we had a series of options provided by staff that overlaid the calendar for seating the next council. And I think I heard you say that the reason that you all took this up was to try to prevent any kind of issues that might arise from seating a new council. I don't see it on this calendar, so I'm trying to understand what is the assumption for seating.
Right. So in the event of a May 23rd, in the event of an April 26th general election, the earliest a new council could be seated is in June, in the first meeting in June. So that would imply that this May 23rd vote that we're looking at here would be done by the old council.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Driggs, so the next committee would be the Great Neighborhoods Committee. Mr. Graham, if you want to give that update.
I think you have the report right in front of you. It's pretty self-explanatory. I think the biggest thing is that the manager sent out a memo, and we referred to it earlier in the meeting, of our director.
Okay. Oh, we lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So hopefully at the appropriate time, with the assistance of the management team, we can send Ms. Weidman out the correct way. 30-year public servants, done a great job for the city of Charlotte. And so that's basically the news coming out of the Neighborhood Development Committee, as well as what you have in front of you. And so, we look forward to sending her out the right way, and looking forward to working with the management team to see how we do that.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. We're going to jump over to the Safe Communities Committee, so we'll let Mr. Eggleston take that.
All right. So not too much of a report. We've got a report back from staff. We've been focused on street safety, pedestrian, cyclist, motorist safety, and the committee has expressed a desire to come up with some additional solutions. Obviously, some of the ones we've talked about that you're aware of, things like speed cameras, red light cameras, we've gotten reports back on those, but also wanting to look at things that don't require potential legislative partnership. Those things I think we want to keep on the table, but we understand that there is a need to get buy-in or rule changes in Raleigh. So those are not quick, short-term solutions. We've asked staff, they will bring back to us on our meeting in January, which has been moved from January 4th to January 11th. To take into consideration that we don't have a full council meeting that first week of January. They will bring back to us at that next meeting identified corridors or intersections or areas of town that are the most problematic in terms of most dangerous streets in our communities, and also will have identified a couple of ideas or solutions that we can pilot in those corridors or in those areas. So the hope will be that at that January meeting or February meeting at the latest, that the committee will vote out some of those targeted areas with pilot solutions for the full council to consider, and those are things that we can roll out on our own, and we can do so quickly. So that is the main focus of the work in that committee now, and again, January 11th will be the next meeting where we expect to have those ideas put forward.
Thank you. Next committee update is the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Mr. Bakari or Mr. Winston, do you want to take that?
I can jump on it. So in our last committee meeting, again, I just would like to thank Dana Fenton for continuing to give those Friday updates. If you're not checking those, council members, he's giving a lot of the updates on the discussions that we're having in real time, week to week. But Mr. Fenton and our lobbyists went over the potential for advocacy on the bipartisan infrastructure plan as funds continue to become available. There were discussions of how council members can be helpful in understanding projects and relationship building that can be helpful to bring those funds not just to our city but to our region. Of course, we got the federal and state legislative updates. And we went over our federal and state legislative agenda, which we as a full council approved, I believe, later that day. There were two items that were not referred by the council on this current legislative agenda, but we thought that it would be proper to have the opportunity for full council to have a discussion about that. At least one of them, because of the interest that council members have put forward in the past couple of weeks and months. That was particularly red light and speed cameras and the expansion of the Aging in Place program. That would be the possibility of bringing property tax relief to folks who have lived in their homes for a certain amount of time. And that are on fixed incomes. So I do believe Mr. Fenton, while he has put something, as you can see in the committee update around red light cameras and Aging in Place, I do believe he is prepared to have a bit of a discussion about what we talked about in committee, why we decided not to recommend, and give council the ability to kind of ask some questions now about advocating for that in our legislative agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Bakari. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Nope, that's a good update.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next committee is Transportation Planning and Environment Committee. We met on, and my committee members are Mr. Eggleston, Mr. Driggs, Mr. Newton, and Mr. Winston. We met on November 22nd. And we had three areas that we really, we had presentations that were covered. One was an update on the strategic mobility plan, and we had a really good presentation from Ed McKinney on recommendations for, there was a recommendation that came from the Comprehensive Transportation Review to reduce trip thresholds for current traffic impact studies and recommend the implementation of a more multimodal improvement process associated with development that aligns with our new policy maps and the future land use of the city of Charlotte. And we would be focusing more on improvement for pedestrian, bike, safety, and access to transit. And that was really, we were all pretty excited to hear that staff is taking those steps to do that. And this would also apply to by right development that would be envisioned in the UDO. That would be part of, so council can take a look at that under the streets manual. That's where you'll find those guidelines, the streets manual being part of the policy map in the UDO. Let's see, the staff is going to anticipate doing test sites to see how this applies to to see how this applies to less intense places and how it applies to different types of projects, and use it so staff can assess the components of the review process to determine if future considerations are needed. The second topic was the Silver Line LPA, the locally preferred alignment, and the most recent round of public engagement focused on potential project refinements and preliminary staff recommendations for project phasing. And they gave us a list of the various refinements, and you all have that in your document if you want to dig deeper into that. And then the last item was the phasing of the Silver Line, and we had a discussion on the rationale for having to phase the entire line, which really has everything to do with federal funding and competing for federal funding. They felt that if we could break it into segments based on what we could deliver to the community as quickly as possible, that we would be a better candidate for some of the federal funding. And also just a reminder with that for those other segments that are outside of our jurisdiction, local and regional financial commitments are going to be needed for those jurisdictions that they serve, since this is potentially a 3-county project. So that was it for TAP. And the next committee would be Well, unless anyone has any questions on TAP. Okay, the next committee would be Workforce and Business Development Update from Mr. Bakari.
Thank you. And I won't repeat everything you can read there. I'd mentioned that today we had a committee meeting with a very robust initial starting conversation on small business. We heard from several of our really great small business partners in the community that are doing a bunch of help and work there. Work continues with Hire Charlotte and other things, but we are now really kind of going head first into, with urgency, into how can we focus on help and support and grow our small business ecosystem. So much more to come there. We're only in the initial parts of a lot of these conversations, but we're going to move aggressively, and I hope we can have something both meaty in the committee as well as back to broader council to discuss on.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Bakari. That wraps it up for the committee report outs. Although, do you have, Madam Mayor, do you have a, okay, no, that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think the only one that has something coming up on the agenda would be the budget and effectiveness for the calendar. So we'll see that, and on others, we'll just continue to have the reports and the updates on the action items until we reach a conclusion or recommendation. So with that, we're ready now to go into our closed session. When we go into our closed session, for everyone that is still watching the council meeting virtually, no further action or votes will be taken and for city business on this during this meeting, and the meeting will adjourn immediately after the closed session. So with that, I'm going to ask the city attorney to read the request to go into closed session.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. I'd like a closed session pursuant to GS 143-318-11A3 to preserve the attorney-client privilege in the matter of Mack versus City of Charlotte.
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we
Second.
have a second? All right. With that, is there any discussion on this motion? Hearing no discussion on the motion, we'll go right to our roll call vote before we start setting up the remainder. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Bakari?
Yes.
Did
Yes.
I hear? Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Phipps?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Watlington?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
All right. So we'll now go, if you'll follow the instructions that were provided.